Weathered and worn with unlimited potential. Today on Truck Tech, we take delivery on our latest Project Low and Slow. Find out what's in store for this 53-year-old C10.
Hey, welcome to Truck Tech. As you can see, we're outside the shop today with a good surprise waiting for us.
One of the golden rules in the automotive world is to never purchase a vehicle sight unseen. Today we have done just that. We have a new project truck that just showed up, and this is the first time we get to see it in person. Man, I think we lucked out so far.
Yeah, let's see
she's
what we
looking
got.
good. This
Yeah, I
thing is
believe
awesome.
so.
Well, as you guys can tell, this is a 1965 Chevrolet C10, and it is wearing a beautiful, original, 100% authentic Patina treatment.
It is nice.
We searched for some time to find a clean truck for our next build. And this one comes to us from Marshall, Texas. It's very solid since it hasn't been eaten up by road salt, snow, or humidity. You know, of course, you've got to have the old blanket-style seat cover to
I
complete
wouldn't
the
have it
package.
any other way, I really would.
All those years in the sun have given this truck a unique and one-of-a-kind look. You know, probably most kids today wouldn't even know how to drive this truck.
Probably
Three-speed
not.
on the column.
Probably not.
Actually, one of the first trucks I learned how to drive, 69 Chevy, K20, 3 on the tree, 6-cylinder.
There you go.
Brings back some memories, man. Right now, it has a 305 under the hood. We're unsure of what engine it had originally, but it was likely a 283. We'll get this truck inside and take a closer look. So right off the bat, it's fairly obvious this truck wasn't just pulled out of a hayfield somewhere. Along the way, somebody's done a few odds and ends to get this truck running and driving. And the first giveaway, well, it's the fuel tank. On this era of truck, it was originally mounted behind the driver's seat. In fact, ours is still there, but it's probably just full of rust, so it would have been easier just to mount an aftermarket tank behind the rear axle.
Now, one cool factor is the rear suspension on this truck utilizes a truck or trailing arm style suspension. Now, we know this has performance potential because it's something that NASCAR actually used in the past as a certain style of suspension. One other thing you may have noticed is this truck sits a little lower to the ground than a stock one would. Now, they've done this by heating up the coil spring so it sags just a little bit to get that stance nice and low. Not the proper way, but it's something we'll handle.
We got very lucky underneath the truck because the cab floors and rockers, everything's in pretty good shape, especially considering it's over 55 years old. The only exceptions, there's a couple of small holes in the floor and rocker on the passenger side.
Now, we like the fact that this transmission utilizes the shifter on the steering column. We want to do something similar, even though it might not be this exact one.
Now, there's a lot of great potential in this truck. It's really solid underneath. But before we tear this thing apart, we're going to get it out on the road and see how it drives. Whenever you buy a project truck or a second-hand engine, the motor's definitely going to have some miles on it. More often than not, the seller is going to claim that it was driven by a little old lady to church on Sunday mornings and it has only 10,000 miles on it. But the real story is probably more like it was driven by a 16-year-old kid and has had the snot beaten out of it. So how do you know what the true story is? Because the health of an engine can definitely affect how much you should pay for it. So today, I'm going to show you a couple of quick tests that you can do to easily give a health report to an older engine. If the engine is still in the vehicle, or you can start it up on a stand, the first thing I do is start the engine and run it for a little bit and see what comes out of the tailpipe. Now, hopefully you don't see anything, but if you do see some light bluish smoke, that's a pretty good indication the engine could be burning oil, either through the piston rings or worn valve seals. This one looks pretty clean, but there is a more scientific way to see how your engine is doing. A compression tester is a tool that everybody should have in their arsenal, and it'll tell you a lot about the internal health of your engine. As the crankshaft rotates and the piston moves up and down, it'll trap air from the atmosphere and compress it. Now, in order to compress the air enough to make the engine run properly, you have to have a lot of parts that are working up to par. You have to have a good finish on the cylinder wall, good piston rings, good valve seals, and of course a good head gasket to seal all that pressure inside the engine. Now, depending on what style of engine you have and what modifications you might have done, the reading might vary greatly. But for a stock small block Chevy like ours, we expect a reading somewhere between 140 and 180 psi if everything is working perfectly. Now, the first step to conducting a compression test is pulling all the spark plugs. To let the engine crank over quickly, each of the spark plugs need to be removed from the head. Next, the power going to the ignition coil needs to be disconnected, and the throttle plate needs to be held open for the duration of the test. With the adapter threaded into the head and the gauge connected,
All right, hit it.
we'll crank over the engine until the reading on the gauge stabilizes.
Okay. About 140.
And record the value. We'll repeat this process for all 8 cylinders. So we measured a range between 140 and 170 psi on all 8 cylinders, with the average being 157. Now that's not great news, but it's also not the end of the world. It just means that 305 is worn out, but at least we know what we're starting with inside that engine.
Next, one baloney burn.
New Chevy and an old Chevy.
Except he's passing us, we're not passing him. Feel the bumps.
Feel the
bumps.
You know, this was just before the days of airbags and traction control and ABS, and man, we're lucky to have an FM radio.
Don't think it works, but we got one, so that's good.
Oh, she sputtered a little bit.
Dude, I'm surprised it's got that pull though like that.
Yeah, well, like we said, I don't think that engine's original. It says it's a 305.
No, but that transmission's about this big.
You know, what I'm noticing now that we're getting on this kind of curvy back road, this steering is like, basically you kind of think of where you want to go.
And just say, yeah.
You can just guess. You can point this wheel anywhere. It's going where it wants to. So what do we do to a truck like this? I mean, it's got a beautiful finish on the outside. It runs fairly decent for what it is. I mean, what can we mess with it?
Maybe we get the heater working to start.
Okay, that's a good point. Start with a heater.
You know, man, I don't think we need to go super crazy on horsepower or anything. Let's get it exciting for sure.
You know, one of my things is I've said this a lot before, is I hate doing stuff that is common and that everybody has done. You know, the first thing people would say is, all right, throw an LS in it, or it's because it already has a small block, well, you know, put a newer small block in it or something like that. To me, that just, it's not exciting. You know, what about maybe like a 6-cylinder? You know, they had a lot of
straight 6.
They had 235s, 250s, you know, the 292. You know, we could try to look around to see if we can find one of those.
Yeah, maybe get on the bigger end of the straight 6s with that 292 range and build that up, do something a little different with it. I don't know.
So the biggest question everybody's going to ask us is, are you going to leave the Patina? So let's get that out of the way right now.
I think the answer to that is yes. I think we're leaving it. We're not touching it. Maybe we'll have a little surprise here or there.
Yeah, you know, it took the last 54, 55 years for this truck to kind of earn its color and earn basically how it looks, which is really unique and hard to duplicate. So I say we just leave it.
Yeah, I'm down with that.
All right.
What do you say we burn the rubber off these bad boys?
Why not?
Oh, yeah. Don't stop, baby. We got smoke on that one.
That's the old one-tire fire.
One tire one that we call that.
After months of searching, we just picked up our newest project truck, this 1965 Chevrolet C10 short box fleet side straight out of Marshall, Texas. The million-dollar question is, what direction are we going to take with the build of this truck? Because there are a lot of different options. We already know we're not going to be messing with the exterior. Since it already looks perfect in our opinion, there's no need to change anything. However, the powertrain and suspension, those areas could certainly use some attention.
Now, we nicknamed this truck Project Low and Slow, and to help it live up to that, there are a few ways we can go about it. A common method is to replace these steel coil springs with an airbag suspension. This will give you a nice adjustable ride height for when you really want to slam those rockers on the ground when parked. All you have to do is push the button when you're ready to ride.
Now, the other thing we could do would be install a coilover suspension system. Now, this won't be adjustable, but it'll greatly improve the suspension geometry and the handling of this classic American pickup.
Also, we want to keep the rustic appearance on the outside. We don't want to touch it, but we do want the underneath to look nice and clean. So the first thing we need to do is get this frame ripped out, get it prepped for a coat.
Pull it back a little.
Coming back.
Think this car will hold it?
We're gonna find out. That'll work.
Oh yeah, we're golden.
All right, bro, let's check this thing out.
I guess the big question is, how's the frame look?
Man, not bad at first glance. I mean, a little bit of pitting here and there, nothing we didn't really expect from a 50-some-odd-year-old truck.
Well, speaking of 50-some years old, still wearing a chambered muffler, complete with no hanger and exhaust leaks.
I like it, I like it.
All right, so I guess what, the next step is get the cab undone?
Yeah, let's find these body bolts and yank it out.
All right.
Go ahead.
Ah, there we go.
It's just a simple matter of removing the battery, getting the cooling system drained, and the radiator removed. I'll disconnect the brake line, the shift linkage at the column, and remove a few wires. So very nice. Then we'll get the lift arms in place and get this crusty old cab out of here.
So if you're ever at home by yourself on the holidays and you see a couple guys outside carrying these, you're probably about to have a whole lot of fun.
What, you trying to try out for the Wet Bandits?
So you can really learn a lot about the history of a pickup truck just by yanking off the body and taking a look at the frame. One thing I've learned is this truck was probably used really hard on a farm or a ranch. Now check out some of the localized damage in this area right here. Normally guys will come and put a tow hook right here. So this truck was probably stuck in the mud. Buddy came along with his tractor, hooked up a chain and just gave it a real hard yank and caused some pretty good damage right here, but nothing we can't fix. Same thing over here. There's a couple of small stress cracks that have probably just developed from years and years of hard use and vibration.
Yeah, man. Also, check out the size of this transmission.
That is tiny.
Super small.
All right, well, let's get this thing out of here, get that cab off the lift.
Let's have at it.
We've got a great looking classic project truck over there, and right now it's a little bit useless since it won't be driving anywhere for quite a while. And we've been teasing you guys for some time now about which direction we're going to take with this build. And right now, we're going to tell you the plan. We're going to lower this truck with a QA1 coilover conversion system that'll have parts for both the rear and the front. It comes with lower and upper control arms and, of course, coilover shocks that'll be mounted on all four corners that'll bring this truck down 4 inches in the front and 6 inches in the rear, which, in our opinion, is the perfect height for a mid-60s Chevy C10.
Absolutely. And while you were gathering suspension components, I was working on brakes and steering. Now, as you could tell with the cab off on this truck, there's still a lot of OEM components. And some of that are these old drum brakes. Now, we're not going to keep this power plant. We know we're going to do something high performance. Even though we won't go too crazy, we still want to stop. So these got to go. We went over to Summit Racing and picked up this big brake kit. This will allow for better cooling and quicker stopping. In order to get that bolted on, had to get these spindles too. So.
All right, well, the way I see it, we've got two different choices. We could get dirty, we could bolt on some of these parts on that frame, or what I think is a better option, we got Project Red Tide over here. It's got a full tank of gas and I've got the keys. Why don't we go for a drive?
I like that plan.
It's one of the more popular trucks to restore, the 60 to 66 Chevy C10. And today on Truck Tech, ours is back for blasting and chassis assembly. Plus, our guys unveil the unusual power plant between the frame rails. What will it be?
Welcome to the shop. We recently picked up the 65 C10 Project Low and Slow. Now, we looked far and wide for this thing and finally found that classic patina iron we were looking for.
Now, this truck has great bones to build on, and the appearance, well, it's exactly what we're after. We're not going to change a thing. But the drivetrain parts that came with this truck, they had seen better days. So we picked up a couple of goodies, and we'll get to those just a little bit later on. But first, we need a good foundation to start this build from.
And it's not like we're building a full-blown racer here, so this stock chassis will work just fine. It was just a little bit dirty for our taste.
So we stripped it completely down, had it sandblasted, and a fresh coat, a semi-gloss powder coat applied. And if this is the first time you're seeing our project, here's a quick look back at where it all began. We broke the #1 rule of truck buying and pulled the trigger sight unseen. Since this truck had spent its life in sunny Marshall, Texas, we figured it would be pretty solid, even though it's well over 50 years old.
We brought it inside the shop, gave it a once-over, and we were pleasantly surprised to find the sheet metal was in very good shape for its age. The truck was mostly original, with the only major changes being the torch coils and a later model 305 small block. However, we did get the impression this truck was slapped together for a quick sale.
You'll find a lot of interesting wiring solutions when you're tearing apart an old truck. Here's a perfect example. The last person that owned this vehicle moved the fuel tank from behind the seat to the back of the frame, so obviously they had to extend the wire for the fuel tank sending it. Check out how they did it. They started out by running the wire through a rust hole in the inner rocker, and then they ran the wire up to the bottom of the bed and looped it around another rust hole. Now, if you know anything about electricity, you'll know that voltage does not cooperate with ground. Now, this wire doesn't have any power going through it, but if it did, this would be a direct short whenever that insulation will chafe through. So there's like a million ways you could have done it better than this, but here's a perfect example of how not to run wiring.
Since the truck mechanically checked out, we decided to hit the road and see how this old girl performed. And it was a blast to roll through the gears with the 3 on the tree, although the coils did make the ride a little bumpy. Feel the bumps.
A little
Feel the
uneven.
bumps.
And even though our truck is a more deluxe model, by today's standards, it's very bare bones. You know, this was just before the days of airbags and traction control and ABS, and man, we're lucky to have an FM radio.
Don't think it works, but we got one, so that's good.
And we couldn't end the shakedown without one very important test.
What do you say we burn the rubber off these bad boys?
Why not?
Oh yeah! Don't stop, baby. We got smoke on that one.
That's the old one-tire fire.
One tire wonder, we call that.
With all the fun out of our system, we got right to work to begin the teardown process. We removed the bumpers, unbolted the bed, disconnected some hoses and wiring underneath the hood, and lifted the cab off, getting down to the rolling chassis.
With all the drivetrain removed, we took a trip to Blast from the Past in Lebanon, Tennessee, where they strip and powder coat a wide range of parts for various applications.
How's it going, Vance? Good to see you again.
Y'all doing all right?
Absolutely.
The powder coat process starts out with the crushed glass media, which removes all the rust and corrosion. Once prepped and in the booth, the dry powder is electrostatically applied. This allows it to stick to the surface, but will still require a quick bake in the oven to fully cure. And this is the finished product. Nice and clean. We chose the semi-gloss black powder coating for its durability, and it's going to last a long time. Now, with a little pre-planning, we knew we were going to have to do some frame modifications. And with the style of suspension we're going with, this front coilover is going to come right through this cross member, so we had to cut out some holes. We chose to do it before the powder because we didn't want to cut into it after.
We took the same approach on the rear with the C-notch. Our reinforcement also includes an upper coilover mount and a lower panhard bar mount that'll keep the axle located side to side. This kit is actually designed to be 100% bolt-on with the bed still on the truck. But we just figured since we're blasting and coating the frame anyway, why not weld it in ahead of time for a nice slick look?
And that makes this chassis 100% ready to bolt on some parts. We got some unboxing to do.
I got the scissors.
Next, putting the low in low and slow.
We have two goals for the suspension on Project Low and Slow, our 65 C10. First is to get it sitting closer to the ground, and second is to improve its handling. We didn't want to mess around with the hassle or complexity of an adjustable air suspension system. So instead, we're installing a QA1 coilover conversion. And it's all based around these tubular upper and lower control arms that'll correct the caster issue that these trucks have when you lower them. You can run up to 7 degrees. The coilovers are double adjustable. They have a 750-pound spring on the front, a 200-pound spring on the rear, and you can adjust both compression and rebound valving. Now this kit does run a later model 73 to 87 style ball joint, which requires you run a later model spindle. So we picked up this 2-inch drop spindle from Summit Racing, which when combined with the control arms and the coilovers will lower the front of this truck 5 inches.
And out back, the stock truck arms are replaced with these beefy 7-gauge bars that have an included pinion angle adjustment. It also comes with a longer panhard bar and a front mounting bracket with multiple mounting locations so you can really fine-tune that anti-squat. Round it all out, kit comes with these heavy-duty front and rear sway bars, and that's to keep the truck planted hard when cornering. Now, first thing we got to do is finish mounting these lower control arms.
The upper spring mount bolts onto the cross member and the frame with some existing holes and new provided hardware. The lower coilover mount is bolted to the control arm with a spacer. And the coilover shock slides from underneath the cross member and attaches to the spring mount with a through bolt and some more spacers. The control arm pivots up to meet the other end of the coilover, and all the hardware is tightened up. Up top, the dished spacers slide onto the mounting point, and the control arm slides into place. The lower bump stop and bracket bolt onto the control arm, and the spindle attaches to the lower ball joint. Hop up on that frame for me,
Need
would
some
you?
muscle?
Well, I don't know about that. With a little assistance, the springs are compressed. Then, the upper ball joint can be connected.
You caught some threads on there?
Yeah, we're good, man, thanks.
All right, my job is done.
So there are a lot of important suspension components that use a castle nut and cotter pin to make sure that the nut doesn't back off over time. There are some slots in the top of the nut that have to engage with a hole in the bolt, and you slide a cotter pin through just to make sure everything stays tight. Now, one thing that is very, very important is you never want to loosen a castle nut to make sure that the cotter pin will line up. You always go tighter. Once the proper torque is reached, continue to turn the nut until the next slot lines up with the hole. Insert the cotter pin and bend out the ends.
Over at the table, we'll attach the urethane bushings to the sway bar. Slide on the brackets and loosely tighten the hardware. The spherical end links attach to the sway bar. Mind grabbing that end over there?
Absolutely.
And the whole thing slides under the front end. And first, connects to the lower control arms. And finally, the bracket's attached to the frame.
Well, with just a couple of bolts, we have a great looking chassis and we accomplished both of our goals. It sits lower to the ground and its handling is greatly improved.
Now we're ready to start on the rear, and that all begins with the main piece of the puzzle, that dirty, greasy rear axle. We're not gonna leave it like that, so hey, let's get this thing cleaned up and get some paint on it.
You got it.
Next, Austin has a blast.
Now we drug this axle out here to get it cleaned up before I take it on in that paint booth and slap some fresh paint on it. And to get the years of grit, grime, and rust off this thing, I got just a fix to make that easy.
This is the DB500 from Dustless Blasting, a self-contained surface prep machine that's both efficient and environmentally friendly, and it will remove virtually any coating from any surface without creating a huge plume of dust. So we'll fire this bad boy up, show you how it works. Everyone knows what a messy job blasting can be. Dustless blasting is exactly the opposite. Water mixes with the media, which keeps the blasting material to a confined area without flying all over the place. Plus, unlike working with dry media, we don't have to stick our head through a cloud of debris to see the axle.
We're using crushed glass media, which is efficient at removing rust, paint, and scale from a slew of surfaces. This works great on a variety of metals, including stainless steel and aluminum. It even strips surfaces like concrete, brick, and wood.
But an unseen benefit to one of these units is its money-making potential. DustlessBlasting.com has it all laid out, from setting up your business to pricing out jobs, all the way down to how to market and advertise your own mobile dustless blasting service.
To protect our axle from future rust, we stopped over at Single Source located in Nashville, Tennessee, where they supplied us with the right material for the job. I'm mixing up a direct-to-metal epoxy primer with a catalyst at a 2-to-1 ratio, which is perfect for our freshly blasted axle. So I have this gun set up where I can shoot sideways, inverted, upside down, you name it. Just got to purge the cup first, shoot a test pattern, and then spray some paint. A quick pattern check. And now we'll lay down 2 wet coats and let it flash off for about 30 minutes. For a top coat, I'm using single-stage polyurethane enamel base. It mixes 6 to 1-to-1 with hardener and a catalyst. This gives us protection and color all in one shot. And it's hot rod black, baby. 3 coats and let cure.
The rear suspension assembly begins with the trailing arms attaching to the cross member.
Since I'm such a gentleman, I already bolted these brackets on for you.
Man, some girl's gonna be lucky when she marries you.
The rear axle attaches with some 5/8" bolts. The pinion angle adjusters attach. The axle is raised. The coilovers are connected. And the panhard bar and frame brace will locate the axle side to side. The very last thing we'll do out back is install the sway bar. Then, once the truck is fully assembled and the weight's on the ground, we'll make some minor adjustments to the pinion angle and the front pivot points. But for very little effort, the handling and ride quality of this truck is greatly improved. In fact, it's so easy to install, even someone like you who grew up working on covered wagons can figure out how to put it together.
Not everybody could be born on a lobster boat up in Maine. But that about wraps up the suspension on this thing. We still got to throw some gears in the rear and assemble that axle. That leaves Project Low and Slow living up to at least half its name.
Now, you'll take care of the slow part too,
Yeah,
right?
I'll take care of that.
There's an old saying in New England which goes something like, if the brakes ain't gonna stop your car, you better not head down to the harbor because you're gonna get wet.
You're a one-wit fella.
Well, that's probably true. But I would still say that brakes are one of the most important systems to have on your vehicle. In fact, I always say never leave home without them. Our 65 Chevy C10 was originally equipped with drum brakes on all 4 corners. And it's a pretty antiquated system, but they work pretty simply. There's a hydraulic wheel cylinder that's attached to the backing plate, and whenever you depress the brake pedal, hydraulic pressure forces open the shoes. Now this friction area right here presses against a rotating drum, and it's that friction that'll slow your vehicle down. Like I said, drum brakes are very old and they're not very efficient, and we're going to be adding some extra horsepower to that truck, so we want to make sure we can always slow down. So we're going to be installing a disc brake conversion kit that we picked up from Summit Racing. And it all starts with these 13-inch 2-piece rotors. It has a cast iron outer and aluminum inner. They have a 6-piston caliper that will apply pressure to the pads. It also comes with an aluminum wheel hub, brackets to attach to the CPP spindles, and of course, the pads that we need to make the friction and all the hardware that's needed to complete the installation. The rotor's attached to the hat with a series of 1/4-inch bolts and a small dab of red thread locker. Once they're all started, they are torqued to 155 inch-pounds.
Next, the wheel bearing is packed with grease until the rollers are fully coated. With the inside bearing set in the hub, a seal is driven into place.
The outer bearing is packed, and the hub assembly slides onto the spindle. A slotted washer and castle nut hold the hub in place. A cotter pin stops the nut from backing out. A dust cover is installed, and the rotor slides over the wheel studs.
The caliper bracket attaches to the back of the spindles with a predetermined thickness of shims and another dab of thread lock. With the bolts tight, 2 more shims go onto the mounting studs. The caliper slides on, the nuts are tightened, and the pads slide into the caliper.
All right, with just a little bit of effort, we've been able to greatly improve the stopping power of this 65 C10. So now, regardless of how fast we're going, whether it be on the track or on the street, we know that we'll be able to safely bring this truck to a stop.
And just remember, when upgrading to a big brake kit, it will limit the size of wheels you can run. For instance, this kit will only work with some 17-inch wheels, and we'll probably run 18.
Tell you what, I know a guy, we can get some 22 by 14 forged wheels with maybe like a 420 style tire.
You following your head or something? Obviously. I'm gonna handle the wheels on this.
You know what, get back to work.
Next, there's a straight 6 in our future.
When it came to selecting the power plant for our 65 C10, we had one goal in mind, and that was for it to be different, the oddball. We didn't have any crazy expectations of making high horsepower. Our thing was, let's just make it faster than stop.
Since just about every truck we build here has some sort of a V8 under the hood, we decided for Project Low and Slow, we're going to be installing a Chevy 292 straight 6. Now, it's kind of an oddball, but these were primarily used in heavy-duty and commercial applications. And from the factory, they put down 165 horsepower and 280 pounds of torque, which is not a bad start. But we do have some upgrades in mind where we'll be able to pump up the output of this engine, and it just might involve some boost.
To back up to our 292, we picked up this Tremec TKO 5-speed from American Powertrain. This will give us a nice wide gear ratio for quick acceleration, but still maintaining those low RPMs at highway speeds. American Powertrain not only offers high-quality transmissions, but their main focus is to supply you with everything you need for an entire conversion. This kit includes the bell housing, cross member, clutch assembly, and even that classic old white shifter knob. Also is an entire hydraulic clutch kit with stainless lines and master cylinder. Lastly, fiberglass high hump trans tunnel. This will give you the clearance you need for mounting the trans, installs easily, and give you a clean look. Let's get this thing mocked up.
We're not installing the motor for good at the moment, since it'll have to come out to be rebuilt later on.
For now, we'll install the bell housing on the trans, skip the flywheel and clutch, and go straight to mating the transmission to the engine.
Your transmission's too high.
Let me lower the transmission.
Can you lower the table?
Lift her up.
We picked up some adapter mounts from 12bolt.com to attach our 292 to the small block Chevy frame stands. Once we have the tail shaft right where we need it,
Lock her down. Dead center.
the mounts are tightened up, and the adjustable X-Factor cross member is lined up.
We'll mark and drill 2 holes in the side of the frame, slide the cross member back in, and bolt it in for good, completing the mock-up install of the 292 TKO combo in our 65 C10. Brothers Trucks offers a wide range of stereo and speaker components for your 1947 to 87 Chevy truck. Case in point, this is what we picked up to install in Project Low and Slow. It all starts with this 300-watt digital AM/FM tuner with integrated Bluetooth. It maintains that factory appearance that we love, and it's also vehicle specific, so you're not cutting into that dashboard. We grab these 6x9s in the under-the-seat sub, crank out that boom. Lastly, custom kick panels that maintain that air vent. Kick out the jams and visit brotherstrucks.com.
How do you add go to an industrial straight 6? Turbosize it. Today on Truck Tech, Low and Slow gets this power adder. Plus, is that Austin running a fine patina finish? The man with a plan will spill the beans.
How about you get out of here and let me prep this one?
Today on Truck Tech, we're going to be spending some long overdue time on our 1965 patinaed C10 that we nicknamed Low and Slow.
Now, it has been a minute since we worked on this project, and I'm excited to get back jumping in it. But I'm beginning to get just a little wee bit concerned about this name, Low and Slow.
What's wrong with the name?
Well, low, I totally dig.
Yeah.
You know, this new suspension is going to drop that stance down right where we like to see it. But slow, I mean, have you been breathing in too many diesel fumes or something? You need a doctor? Because I'm
All right.
staring at an inline 292 right here.
Okay, well, a couple of things. Number one, the nickname is sort of intentionally misleading because you should know me by now, even though I do get a couple of diesel fumes every now and then. You should know I don't like to go slow. Number two, yeah, this engine, it'll never make 1,000 horsepower, but I do have a couple of old tricks up the sleeve which will really boost up the output of this engine, make the truck scoot down the road in a hurry.
I guess I'll have to trust you on this one, and I'm excited to see what you got up these tiny little sleeves. Now, this project has come a long way since we first started, but it's got a long way to go. We bought this truck sight unseen, and we're very pleased to find out how nice of a patina it had on its surface. It came to us from Marshall, Texas, where the sun is always shining. So the elements had plenty of time to work their magic on the paint without completely rotting away the metal.
And this truck would actually run and drive, and let me tell you, it was an experience. The manual shift on the column was a throwback for sure, which made this truck an absolute blast. Even though the suspension was completely shot, the engine had a slight miss, and the bench seat was like riding on a horse-drawn wagon.
Feel the bump. So we didn't waste any time on low and slow. We got right to work on tearing her down. We're not going to be touching much of anything on the exterior, but we did want to address the frame. So the first thing was to remove that bed and cab off the chassis. Once it was all stripped down, we sent it off to get a new coat of semi-gloss black powder coat, and then built out the frame with an all-new suspension, which will sit nice and low to the ground, and greatly improved the handling of this 55-year-old pickup.
Finally, we paired a GM 292 straight 6 with a Tremec 5-speed from American Powertrain, which will give this truck truly a unique driving experience.
First produced in 1963, this engine could be found all the way through the mid-'80s, even produced in foreign markets. Now, you wouldn't typically find it in your average everyday pickup, but more likely that light-duty commercial application. That'd be delivery vans, cargo trucks of the like. And that's for good reason. It's solid, reliable horsepower and also fuel efficient. We chose it for two additional reasons. One, in '65, it was actually an option from GM. And two, well, it's just vastly different from that normal LS swap you're used to seeing on these classic trucks. Coming in at 153 horse, 292 foot-pound of torque, well, it can only get better from there.
That's right, we can always add a whole lot more power. And if you guys are not used to seeing a Chevy straight 6, the cylinder head might look just a little different from what you're used to seeing on modern engines. And that's because the exhaust and intake ports are on the same side of the cylinder head, and the manifolds sort of intertwined. Now, to add power, we need to get more air into and out of this engine, and the stock manifolds just aren't going to cut it. With the manifolds laid out on the table, you can see the interesting way that they stack these together. The intake sits on top, and the intake ports are sort of staggered in the middle, and the exhaust manifold sits below and fills in the spaces in between. Now, this engine was designed to be very fuel efficient and not make a whole lot of horsepower, and as such, everything is really small and restrictive. It has a single intake port, and on top of which sits a single barrel carburetor. And on bottom, you have a single 2-inch exhaust port. Now, this whole setup is very restrictive and it's not going to move a whole lot of air. So instead, we went to 12bolt.com and picked up one of their split exhaust manifold kits. The runners are much bigger cross-sectional area, so they'll move more air, and each exhaust port is 2.5 inches. For the induction, we went to Summit Racing and picked up an Offenhauser aluminum 4-barrel intake. Again, it's all about bigger ports and moving a greater volume of air. Now, there is one more important part of the puzzle that's going to finish up our horsepower build. I just got to get it.
Next, LT's the man with the V-band plan.
There are a lot of different ways we could pump up the output of our 292. And my power adder of choice has always been the turbo. So I went to Summit Racing and did some shopping. Now, this is a Borg-Warner S366 turbo, and it's a great charger that's affordable and durable, so it'll work perfect for our application. And here's some of the specs. It has a 66mm inducer on the compressor wheel, a 73mm exducer on the turbine wheel, a T4 undivided turbine housing with an 0.88 AR ratio. Now, this thing will ultimately support a lot more power than we're going to be making with that 292, but it'll be right in its peak efficiency zone, somewhere between 400 and 500 horsepower, which is our ultimate goal. Now, the exhaust manifolds that we ordered, they come with this donut style of gasket. Now, that works great in a naturally aspirated application and gives you a nice leak-free seal. However, when you're turbocharging, there's a lot of heat and pressure that's going to be in the exhaust. And these donuts, they'll just blow out. So, someone also sent me a couple of 2.5-inch stainless steel V-bands. Now, this manifold is actually made from ductile iron, which means I can weld to it. So, my first order of business is to chop off this 2-bolt flange and weld on some V-bands.
So I know we told you guys that we weren't going to touch the exterior of this truck. After all, this patina is what makes this project so cool in the first place. But we kicked it around, and after some thought and consideration, we changed our minds. We decided, let's add a little pizzazz in one specific spot. That's that rusty old roof. We're going to paint it, and we're going to drape it all the way down the backside of this body and end up somewhere right on this body line. And as you all know, with a good paint job comes a lot of good prep work. Counter. Truck wants to come with it.
Back at the welding table, our 292 manifolds are going under the knife. The 2-bolt flanges are being cut off to make way for a V-band. Basically just trying to get this flange to sit nice and flat on the manifold with as few gaps as possible. I think we're there. So all I'm going to do is clean up the outside just a little bit so it welds on nice and clean. We're good to go. Once the surface is flat and clean, I can start by tack welding the V-band ring to the manifold. I'm using our Forney 220 AC/DC TIG set at 120 amps for the thicker material. And since I'm joining cast to stainless, I'm using a 309 filler material. I'm also running my go-to number 12 cup and gas lens, which will keep the weld area properly shielded with argon. And my post flow is set to 7 seconds. All right, with just a little bit of effort, we have ourselves a manifold that'll have a nice leak-free seal. Now, if you've never seen how a V-band clamp works, they're actually kind of cool. The sealing surface is made up of these 2 flat areas that just sort of index together. And there's a clamp that holds the whole thing together. Now, on this particular style of V-band, there's a small ridge around the inside that indexes both halves together so they can't wiggle around. But, like I said, a little bit of effort, a little bit of work, this thing will last a lifetime and is guaranteed to never leak.
Next, goodbye, Rusty Jones.
We like showing off our new equipment here at PowerNation. This is the DB500 mobile blasting system from Dustless Blasting. It features a 49 horsepower turbocharged diesel engine that provides 185 CFM of airflow at high pressure. Now, what makes this system different is the media is actually mixed with water, which has multiple benefits. Let's get it fired up, but we're gonna blast the rust off the roof of this C10. The sand and water combination gives Dustless Blasting its name, the man in the mask. It's less messy than traditional systems. I can actually see what I'm doing since the water keeps the particles on the protective plastic below and not floating in the air. And as a result, I can work in my street clothes and don't need to cover up with any additional gear. Now you can clearly see this machine has no problem stripping away all this rust. I mean, this is nice, clean, bare metal compared to all that rusty pitted side over there. A few different options we could have done. We could be all day in the prep booth with that DA sander, ripping through sandpaper left and right and putting up a bunch of dust and rust in the air, having to have a mask on and we'd be covered. I'm really not that wet and I'm not that dirty. As long as my eyes and hands are protected, well, it's easy. You can use all sorts of blasting media. We're using crushed glass, which has the consistency of sand, but you can also dry blast and soda blast because of the unit's air cooler and moisture separator. Another nice feature are the auxiliary air ports so you can run any air tools you might need. Now, can everyone afford one of these units? Probably not, but if you own your own body shop and tired of hiring out all these blasting chores, why not bring it in-house and reap the profits yourself? If you're an average guy or gal, want to start your own mobile blasting business, this is the ideal setup. And Dustless Blasting will set you up with all the materials you need to get you on your way to becoming your own boss.
So what's the story, man? I thought you blasted this thing. The hood's still all rusty.
Did a half of a job.
I see that.
And I gotta say, the starboard side engine has a lot more power than that port side, huh?
What do you want, a boat? So all kidding aside, I have to say it looks like that dustless blaster cleaned off the roof in a hurry. You know, I'm always nervous when we blast something. You guys at home know the risks. Whenever you're stripping paint, you never know what's underneath. Luckily, we have a metal roof and not just a big block of Swiss cheese.
Yeah, there was more than enough material there that stayed to where this thing is totally salvageable. A few minor points here and there where we got a few pinholes, but nothing we can't fix with simple metalworking technique.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the worst of it is kind of right along this edge where the drip rail meets the roof skin. There's a couple of small holes, but like you said, you know, MIG welder take care of that in a hurry.
That's it, and these drip rails are not broken to the point that where they're hanging down or anything, so we're not gonna touch them. Till you start fixing that, there's no telling where you'll stop.
Well, speaking of stopping, I see that you stopped your sandblasting kind of halfway down the back, and you've stripped the roof as well. So help me get inside your head and kind of understand your theory there, because this is a patina truck, and you're obviously going to be painting on the roof.
Yeah, definitely. We bought this for its charm and its natural character, right? But we're still gonna class it up just a little bit with new bright work, custom touches here and there. So why not blast off all this patina on the roof? I know you haters out there are gonna hate, but we're gonna add our little flair, brand new paint.
Well, see, that's where I think you're wrong, actually, because you said patina on the roof. This was just rust. You know, to me, patina is paint and rust that have kind of intermingled. You know, up here, it was just a solid block of brown rust, so I don't see anything wrong with blasting that off and put a nice shiny cap on this thing, and it'll really set it apart from the crowd.
I obviously agree, so how about you get out of here and let me prep this so I can get some primer on it so it doesn't rust again.
Well, I have some cool work to do with the turbo building, and I'll let you take care of this boring body work.
Sort it out.
Next, protecting that bare metal.
Welcome back to Truck Tech. I'm laying down 2 coats of epoxy primer on our cab's newly blasted surface. This will prevent that flash rust until we have time to paint it. Now, I bet you're wondering why we chose to use a white primer. You guessed it, we're gonna be painting this thing a super light color. Just can't tell you what it is yet.
When it comes to building or fabricating components to an exhaust system, I like to think of it as a game of connecting the dots. Now, the first job is just figuring out where the dots are going to be. The first 2 are easy. Those are the V-bands that we welded on the exhaust manifolds earlier. Now, the next dot, well, that's the turbocharger, so we need to find a place to mount it. Now, the first space we could go, well, there's a lot of room right here between the engine block and the frame rail. We could easily plumb the exhaust in, but the challenge becomes getting the air into and out of the turbocharger. Now, the next option we could use is do a low remote style mount of the turbo system. Now, there's plenty of space down here between the transmission and the frame rail and a couple different ways you could clock the turbocharger. But the challenge is you have a much longer run into and out of the turbo for the air, and that's going to lead to a little bit more lag. Not only that, you have an oiling system you need to consider. The pressurized oil needs to make it all the way to the turbo, and then we need to run a scavenge pump to get it back to the engine. That's just a lot more complication than we really need. So I'm going to show you a third option, and that's the one that we're going to do. Since the intake and exhaust manifolds are both on the driver's side of a Chevy straight 6, I figured the passenger side is the best place to mount our turbo since it's pretty much wide open. So I went ahead and mocked up a bracket that's going to bolt onto the side of the block right where the motor mounts go. And this is going to provide a nice sturdy place to mount the turbocharger. Now, it's up high, it's out of the way, and there's plenty of space to run a charge pipe out the front, a crossover underneath, and the exhaust out the back. Plus, the oil drain is a straight shot to the pan. So the only thing I need to do is build a crossover. To get the exhaust gases from your vehicle's cylinder head to the rear bumper, the standard material for a long time has been steel tubing. It has a high resistance to heat and is pretty inexpensive to manufacture, and it can be stainless steel, mild, or even aluminized. Now, in order to minimize the amount of leaks that are possible, manufacturers try to keep their exhaust systems in as long of pieces as possible. But in the real world, you have to be able to service your vehicle, so large chunks have to be able to be removed, which means there are some connections. So today, we're going to go over the most basic flanges and connectors that you find in a standard or an aftermarket exhaust system. The exhaust manifold connection is the first place that needs to be removed. And the standard for a long time was this graphite composite donut. Now, it's a fairly soft material that has a high resistance to heat. Now, this is part of the cast exhaust manifold, and this flange will go over a flare on the exhaust pipe. A couple of bolts hold it together, and that's a nice leak-free seal that can easily be removed. A ball and socket type connection is popular in most aftermarket exhaust systems. Now, there's actually no sealing material, it's just one pipe has a flare in it and one pipe has a ball. Now, these are nice because there's a little bit of flexibility in the connection, and again, two bolts hold it nice and tight, and you got a leak-free seal. When you buy an aftermarket exhaust system like a cat back, it often comes to you in many smaller pieces since it has to fit inside of a shipping box. Now, this is a representation of the most common type of connection that you find on just about any cat back. It has a couple of slots on the end of the pipe and a flare at the end. So one pipe just simply slides inside the other. Now, there's two different ways you can seal up that connection, and they're both called a band clamp. You have a narrow style with a single nut and a little bit wider style. Now, these generally seal just a little bit better, but they cost a little bit more. Now, you also have another alternative, and that's welding. Because like I said earlier, these exhaust systems, they can kind of move around a little bit. So if you have your own welder, just take a couple of minutes and weld that joint up. That way you're guaranteed not to have any leaks. A V-band clamp is very common in higher-end aftermarket exhaust systems, and there are three parts. The two rings that you weld onto either end of the pipe, and the clamp that holds the whole thing together. Now, this particular style of clamp has a quick release mechanism that's built in, so you can easily reach down and open up the clamp. Now, there are different styles as well. This one does not have the locating ring, so you have a slight amount of flexibility in the fit-up. And then you have a Marmon flange. This is most popular when it comes to having a downpipe that attaches to a turbocharger. Much like a V-band, this outer ring will weld to the exhaust pipe, and the seal is made up of these two surfaces, but instead of a flat, this has about a 20-degree taper, and the connection is sealed up with the same exact style of clamp. Now, we're really just scratching the surface, but these are the most popular types of exhaust connections that you're gonna find.
If you were to dub an impact wrench a little hammer that could, you'd be referring to this little pint-sized number right here. This is Matco Tools' new half-inch stubby push-button air impact. With best-in-class 700 foot-pound of breakaway torque, it features a variable throttle that allows for precise control in those hard-to-reach places, and also a rear dial regulator that adjusts torque output in the forward position. This unit comes with a 2-year warranty. Visit matcotools.com for more.
One key ingredient to any truck upgrade is an exhaust system that performs well, but it has to sound great too. Our sweepstakes Silverado sports the new Hooker Blackheart Performance exhaust. It's a cat-back design that features a 3-inch intermediate pipe, dual 2.5-inch tailpipes, and a straight flow-through design muffler that'll give an aggressive sound both on and off the throttle. And you can pair it with a set of Hooker shorty headers. Both are made from stainless steel and have been engineered to provide maximum exhaust velocity. Visit Holley.com for more.
Modern diesel fuels are not always the cleanest these days, and every fuel supplier adds different materials to help with lubricity. And sometimes these additives can lead to unwanted deposits in your engine or fuel injectors. Hot Shot Secret Diesel Extreme is a new powerful formula designed to clean and boost engines to their peak performance power. Just add a dose every 6,000 miles to clean your tank, lines, injector tips, all while removing moisture. Find your nearest retail outlet by visiting hotshotsecret.com. Hi, Patina, what you been up to?
Well, I pretty much have the hot side of the turbo kit sorted out. I have one pipe left to put between the rear manifold and the merge. Then it's just a matter of figuring out where to put the wastegate, but this thing is well on its way.
Looking good, and that brings us one step closer to putting the cab on this thing, make it look like a truck again.
That's right, and if you guys have any questions about any of the parts we use, be sure to check out our website, PowerNationTV.com.
Thanks for watching Truck Tech. We'll catch you next week.
Today, Low and Slow's cab hits the frame, but not before we put power to both wheels. Plus,
Now, I know what you're thinking, painting this beautiful Patina truck. Don't call me crazy just yet. Wait till you see what we got planned. as you can tell, we have the C10 chassis sitting on the lift here, and we are ready to dive back in this project and start making some progress.
We have a great head start. Frame is powder coated satin black. We got the suspension assembled, a turbocharged 292 sitting up front, and a Tremec 5-speed that backs it up. Our goal by the end of the day is to have that cab bolted back onto this frame for good.
Now, before we jump the gun and get ahead of ourselves, I still have to shoot some proper paint on that, and I might as well do it while it's off the frame so I'm not masking all this up and we get overspray everywhere. But I also am excited to see this thing rolling on its own 4 wheels.
All right, well, to make that happen, though, we got to finish building out this rear axle because right now it's just an empty housing. But the parts are here, and I have a deal for you. I'll get my hands greasy, I'll handle this rear end, all the grunt work, right? And to help you out, I'll keep my greasy hands far away from that cab as possible.
It's a deal I'll take. Help me push this out before you jump into that, though.
All right, man.
Serious horsepower behind this thing.
I had to point the camera at the guys on the wall. A little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, a little bit to the right. Yep, she's lined up perfect. As power makes its way from the engine to the rear tires, it first has to pass through a differential. Now, this is kind of basic information, but the reason we need a differential is because when you go around corners, the inside wheel always spins at a slower speed than the outside. Now, if you didn't have a differential, the inside wheel would just be skidding along. From the factory, our truck was equipped with an open differential. Now, this is the most basic style that there is, and it does nothing for high-performance driving. Now, if you ever encounter a loss of traction when you're on the power, only one wheel is going to spin, and you're not going anywhere. So we're going to be replacing it, along with everything else that's inside our rear axle, with parts that we got from SummitRacing.com. Now, for the differential, we started out with a Detroit True Track. Now, this is a helical gear style limited slip differential, and it's great for high performance driving because it applies nice even split in torque between both rear wheels, but it still allows for that differential of speed while you're cornering. Now, for the gear set, we chose a 4:11:1 ratio, which is going to provide a nice blend between acceleration and a lower RPM when you're cruising down the highway. We picked up a forged pinion yoke, some new axle shafts with a 5-on-5 bolt pattern that'll match the front, a master install kit which comes with all the bearings, shims, seals, and hardware that we'll need to complete the installation, along with a new TA Performance diff cover that has these reinforcement caps that'll go onto the bearings and help keep everything in place. Our first order of business is to get the ring gear onto the new carrier. Since it's a tight fit, I'll use the 12 bolts to evenly pull the ring gear onto the carrier. Tighten them all up, and it's off to the press where the carrier bearings are installed. Back at the axle, the outer pinion race is driven in with a soft aluminum tool, followed by the inner. One of the most critical steps to setting up a rear end is getting your pinion depth spot on. Now, that's actually controlled by a small shim that's stuck to the table that sits right in between the head of the pinion and the bearing. Now, it's going to take you several different tries to get the exact thickness, since there's really no easy way to calculate the thickness right off the bat unless you have a bunch of really specialized and really expensive tools. So trial and error is sort of the preferred method. Now, that means you have to have the bearing that goes on and off several times. And if you have your final bearing and you move it with a press on and off and on and off, you could possibly damage it. So they sell setup bearings, which are basically the same thing as a regular bearing, except the inside has been ground out just enough to make it easily slide on so we can check our measurements and make another adjustment. The pinion and setup bearing are slid into place, and since I don't have a mock-up bearing for the outer, it gets gently tapped in place with a hammer and metal sleeve. The yoke goes on, and the nut is temporarily tightened down until there's slight rotational drag. Next, the carrier slides into place with some shims, and the caps are tightened down. Just by feel and sound, I can tell that the backlash is almost right where it needs to be, but I'm going to focus on that later. First, I need to get pinion depth squared away. Now, they do make some really expensive pinion depth tools, which are kind of complicated to use. So unless you have one of those, you're not going to nail it the first time around. Well, instead of an expensive tool, we're going to use a really cheap one, some gear marking compound and a brush. All we do is apply it to a couple different teeth and rotate the ring and pinion with just a little bit of drag on it. And the pattern where those two gears are actually touching and rubbing against one another will tell us whether we need to add or subtract from the pinion depth.
Mother of pearl, low and slow in the paint booth? That's next.
Welcome back to Truck Tech. I'm doing a final wipe down on this cab in preparation to shoot some primer. Now if you look close, you can tell time has definitely taken its toll on this panel and pitted it in pretty well. But there's a few ways we could address that. We could skim coat this whole thing with filler, then go ahead and sand it back down to that metal, and the filler will only be filling in those tiny little holes. Some guys actually prefer this method because you're not really building thickness. However, it's very labor intensive. I'm going to choose to shoot some DTM high build primer on this and it'll achieve the same results. The high build is pretty thick, so we're not going to use a strainer. It pours directly in the cup. The primer mixes 2 parts to 1 part catalyst and a half part reducer. It's always good practice to shoot a test pattern even though it's just primer. I do this every time for consistency and repetition. It's the basis of good fundamentals. This is the time to figure out your movements. Distance from the panel, speed of the gun, when and how you're going to move the ladder. This way, when you come back with paint, all the issues are worked out and you can focus on the paint hitting the panel. After letting this hot build primer cure overnight, we push the cab over into the prep booth where I can get a good head start on blocking out these panels. Woo, baby, after about 16 hours of blocking, all the pits are gone. These panels are laser straight with nice soft edges. I think she'll clean up nice.
Keeping the masking on during blocking promotes a cleaner environment and a better paint job. It's now off to the booth to shoot the cab with sealer. This gives the paint a solid foundation for adhesion and helps promote a uniform color. The base coat begins with mixing up this awesome color called ermine white. It was a factory GM color back in the early 60s. It's a solid off-white that is just the right shade we're looking for. The base coat is applied with 25 PSI at the gun, totaling 3 coats.
Now, I just got finished spraying that base coat, but it doesn't stop there. This is where that custom touch comes in, and it all starts right here with this pearl. A lot of guys like mixing this directly into their clear coat, but the issue you can have with that is if you have a run, it's a lot harder to correct and blend in. I prefer to use a high quality color blender, which is essentially a clear base coat. Now, this is custom paint. There's no rules. Throw that out the window. However, there's a few simple things to keep in mind. The first is the size of your pearl to the size of the tip in your gun. You want to make sure your tip's big enough so it doesn't clog up the gun. And well, lastly, if you're running cup filters or screen filters, well, rip those out too.
The most accurate way to measure pearl or flake is with a scale. We're using 1 gram per 28 ounces. I'm going to apply 2 coats of the pearl while keeping the gun set at 25 PSI. The third is a control coat, allowing for uniformity for the desired effect. I'll lower the pressure of the gun from 25 to 17 PSI. The fan pattern remains wide open. This is where the distance from the gun to the panel is extended and the motion of spraying slows down. You're not going for coverage here. You're only trying to get the pearl to lay down nice and even on the panel, no blotching and no striping.
I got one last step before we lay down some clear, and this technique is called backmasking. What I'll do is roll down this edge and it'll allow that clear coat to flow seamlessly right down on the edge of that panel without leaving a hard edge if we were just to do a regular tape line. Taper back just like that.
It's now time for my favorite part of all, and that's smashing on the clear. The gun gets set up with 32 PSI. It's sprayed with a pattern overlap of about 50%, maintaining about a 10-inch distance to the panel. We're gonna finish this bad boy off with a total of 5 coats of clear and let it cure overnight.
Next, rear axle redone.
We've finalized the gear pattern on our 12-bolt, and if you're unsure of which adjustments need to be made, just study the manual which comes with the gears. For us, it's time for final assembly. While it might be a bit confusing, just about every new ring and pinion gear set comes with instructions to help you read the wear pattern. The pinion nut comes off, and the pinion gear is driven out of the housing. We're going to add 10 thousandths to the pinion depth and press on the final bearing. A heavy chunk of metal helps keep the pinion in place while the outer bearing is being pushed on. The new oil seal is now installed. The threads on the pinion are lubed up, and the yoke splines onto the pinion shaft. The nut and washer are installed, and the nut is tightened until the crush collar starts to deform. There's no actual torque value specified for the pinion nut. Instead, it just gets tightened until there's about 20 inch-pounds of rotational drag. Now, the carrier goes into place. The backlash is verified, and now all the hard work is done.
7, right on the money.
To finish up this 12-bolt, we'll apply a little lube into the end of the axle tube and drive the wheel bearing into place, followed by the oil seal. Then the brake backing plate goes on. The very next step is to install the axle shafts into the housing, but first we need to put some wheel studs in the flange. As always, there's 2 different ways to do it. The first method involves using a shot press and a socket, and it effortlessly pushes the knurled wheel studs into the axle. The second way to install wheel studs is also pretty simple, and it involves basic tools that you'll already have kicking around the shop. All you're gonna need is the stud, a lug nut, a washer, and either an impact gun or a ratchet. Apply a little lube onto the threads and knurling, and simply slide the stud through the hole. Put on a washer and the lug nut on backwards, and just crank her down until the wheel stud fully bottoms out in the flange. The completed axle shaft is slid into the housing and engages with a true track. The C-clips will hold the axles from pulling out, and the center pin and cap secures everything inside the carrier with a snap ring. Finally, the diff cover can be installed, and a slight amount of pressure is applied to the cap support screws, finishing up this 12-bolt rear end.
Next, removing the nasty.
The very last thing we're gonna do before we stick this body back on the frame is clean up the underside. The floors are in okay shape, but they just won't make a nice visual contrast against the new frame and suspension. To spruce up the bottom of our cab, we're going to be using some of Duplicolor's new premium undercoating. Since its high build formula will hide some of the imperfections on our cab floor. Now this stuff will prevent corrosion, you can paint over it if you want, and it'll even dampen sound and road noise. And the best part is, the high output delivery system will quickly and effortlessly cover a large surface. Now you can use this stuff on just about anything. Cab floors, fuel tanks, doors, quarter panels, and a whole lot more. But the first thing we gotta do is just a little bit of cleanup. We're using a combination of scrapers and wire brushes to remove 50 years of buildup. Once the surface is prepped, we'll mask the surrounding areas of the cab floor. Since this is an aerosol and doesn't make a ton of overspray, we're just using some 6-inch paper. We're going to apply 2 light coats and let it dry for an hour.
Now, if you notice, we bolted a new set of sneakers on Old Boy. We went to Summit Racing and picked up this awesome set, Nito 555s, paired with these American Racing soft flat style wheels. And if I must say so myself, I couldn't have came up with a better combo even if I tried.
Yeah, I'll give it to you. I think you nailed it this time around. You know, the vintage look of the wheel absolutely sets off the patina look of the rest of the truck. Now, I will admit, though, I was a little bit nervous when you first said you wanted to put a shiny pearl paint job on the roof of a patina truck. But seeing it in person, I do have to admit, I think it actually works. The paint laid down nice and slick. We got rid of all that rust, and the pearl just makes the light kind of sparkle and dance around. It's really just the icing on the cake.
Was that a compliment?
I'll give you one every now and then.
Well, hey, love it or hate it, that's what custom truck building is all about. Add a touch here or there, put your own new innovative ideas, make it happen. If you guys want to see a parts list for anything you've seen in today's episode, visit PowerNationTV.com.
Thanks for watching Truck Tech, and we'll catch you guys next time. So, what are we going to do about this interior, though? Because it's what I'm thinking. Pretty empty. We're back in the shop, and it's time to make some more progress on our 1965 Chevy C10, low and slow.
The entire concept of this build was to keep this old patina look, that rough and rugged vibe, but yet still add a little custom and new touch of bling here and there. Now, we got started with that freshly powder-coated frame, new suspension components, and then these new kicks. Now, the last thing you guys saw us do was to dress the roof of this truck. And that's because there really wasn't any patina left on it. It was mostly just rust anyway. So we decided to slap some nice shiny new paint on it. And that's just the start. There's still a few things left to do.
We're going to continue that same theme underneath the hood. Now, we've already got the 292 in place, and all the heavy fab work is taken care of on the hot side of the turbo. But right now, this is just a mock-up engine. We still have to take it out, disassemble it, rebuild it, and we'll throw in a few performance parts while it's taken apart. Then we'll paint up the engine and get it looking real slick and put it back in so there's a nice contrast between it and the engine bay that's around it. But all that has to wait until another day.
But we can get started on the interior. Our plan for this is to make it inviting, clean and classy, and that involves repainting. We use the same color we used on the exterior roof, except no pearl effect and no shine. And then add in those custom leather seats, nice saddle brown, something to contrast the light color, round it out with some dash components, new and shiny. Now, as you can tell, we already got to cutting on this floor pan, and that's to make room for that 5-speed transmission that American Powertrain sent us. Let's get started on prepping the floor. The earlier C10s came with a fuel tank located inside the cab right behind the seat. Not necessarily the best idea. The brackets aren't in the way, but we decided to cut them flush and grind the edges for a clean look, since the fuel tank will be relocated under the truck. The door sill trim is removed from both sides. And the old rubber is yanked off. Gotta love this adhesive back weather stripping. They definitely made improvements in today's age where it just press fit. I'll go over the mating flange on the trans tunnel with a wire wheel to take care of the rust. Now, I'm not gonna get too crazy with this wire wheel. I'm really only hitting the lip where that high hump panel is gonna adhere to the floor and the other more rusted areas. The rest of the floor is actually in pretty good shape. And we don't need something quite so aggressive to tackle it, so a DA with some 400 grit, Scotch-Brite by hand to get in those hard to reach places, will get the job done. And for the more rusted areas, we'll treat that later before we top coat it. The DA makes quick work of scuffing the rest of the floor since there's no need to strip it down to bare metal. To properly treat the rusted areas, we're using a rust converter. This application will stop the rust in its tracks by chemically changing it to a neutral surface that's ready to be top coated. I gotta say, applying this rust converter is pretty neat. It goes on this beige cream color and then within a few minutes, it turns purple. I'm no scientist or nothing, but changing colors, to me, that means it's working. Just like Picasso.
Next, DIY coating.
Just roll low and slow over in the prep booth. We're gonna test fit that high hump, and that'll bring us one step closer to spraying. I'll drop it in and double check the fitment. A few marks are made in the areas that require trimming. And a body saw makes quick work to get it to the right size without producing a ton of dust. A pilot hole is located and drilled for the stick shift. Final cuts are then made to accommodate full range of the shifter. Surface prep and a good wipe is done on both mating surfaces, and the two-part panel adhesion epoxy is applied generously around the perimeter. The high hump is carefully lowered into place and allowed to cure overnight. Once masked off, the bare metal areas are dusted with a self-etching primer, and a final prep wipe is done on the entire floor, leaving us with only the fun part left. We're gonna lay down this Raptor liner not only because it's great for the bed of a truck, but can also be used in any application you can come up with, such as the floor of a C10. It'll help with sound deadening and also be a durable top coat that'll last for years. We're mixing in about 4 ounces of black base coat since we only have the tintable version of Raptor liner. 2 heavy wet coats will be applied to the entire floor, rear panel, and firewall. And after a few minutes, it's already looking like $1,000,000. When it comes to sourcing high-quality OEM replacement parts, Brothers Trucks comes through for the 60 to 66 Chevy C10. We recently picked up one of their deluxe window seal kits, and it includes everything from front windshield to rear window rubber, door seals, window channel sets, and even vent and hood decal seals. Their kits also include a tube of Permatex weather strip adhesive. Log on to brotherstrucks.com and find your Chevy application.
Well, Austin, I've got to say, just that little bit of bed liner makes a pretty big difference in how this cab looks, and hey, it improves the durability as well.
You know, it's really all those tiny little details that come together and make a great build. Even though that'll be covered up and have fresh new carpet, it'll still dampen that road noise quite a bit.
And I do have to say, this project is off to a great start. And if you guys have any questions about any of the parts that we've used, be sure to check us out at PowerNationTV.com.
From bare to beautiful, Low and Slow gets a custom bench seat when Wyotech's trim and upholstery instructor takes Austin on as a student. Will he get a passing grade?
We're back on Truck Tech, and we're finally knee-deep in tackling the interior of the 65 C10. Now, the last time you've seen us work on it, we were spraying bed liner on the floor, and that'll help and dampen noise and those vibrations. And since then, well, we've been showing you a lot of painting techniques. So I decided not to bore you with the details on this one. I went ahead and sprayed the interior with a fresh coat. And we used the same color we used on the exterior, minus the pearl and minus the clear. After all, you don't want that sun reflecting off a shiny dashboard and hitting you in the eyes. And you guessed it, this is the original seat we yanked out of old Low and Slow. And well, just with a quick glance, you could tell it definitely needs some help. But not to worry, I brought in just the right guy to get the job done. Our buddy Mac is a 4th-generation upholstery expert who has lent his skills to our shops before.
That's why I utilize chalk.
He's an instructor at the Wyotech campus in Laramie, Wyoming, and teaches the next generation of customizers in his trim and upholstery class, preparing young men and women for careers in automotive trim shops, marine and aircraft refurbishers, you name it. Well, Mac, I gotta say, we are glad to have you in the shop, and I think it's our turn to use some of this expertise and knowledge you have.
Well, thanks for the invite. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, now a lot of guys will look at this old seat, and myself included, just want to throw this thing right out and buy a new one, but let's be honest, this is custom truck building, so this might be able to be saved.
Sometimes it's better to take the old seat and do something custom with it. I think we ought to take this old saddle blanket cover off and see what we have. Actually, this seat's not in bad shape. It's a good candidate to do something custom, maybe a leather cover or something like that. I made some sketches. I kind of kept it a little bit retro. If you guys want to do something different, we can always sketch something else out, and that's where we start from.
For sure. Well, yeah, I say we get started, tear this thing down, and go from there.
Let's take it apart.
set it on the ground. This piece is over a half a century old, so stripping it down to the frame, we'll get a better idea of how it was treated by its previous owners. I ordered a bunch of extra material just in case it needs to be completely rebuilt.
So a quick inspection of this bun, Austin. Looks like everything's in decent shape here. We'll take a look at the top side real quick. We have minimal wear on this thing. You know, I would salvage this piece, reuse it.
Looks way better than what I thought it would.
Yeah, so maybe we should take a look at the frame and look at the springs and see what we have.
For sure. No broken springs means all we need to do is put down some burlap.
All right, let's roll that baby out. Set it right there.
And add a layer of jute padding to support the old cushion, which will be reused. When it came to choosing interior trim, we had a few different options. Could have went with cloth, could have went with vinyl. But why would you not want to ride in class on some fine Italian leather? This has a very good hand and is also fade and scratch resistant. And well, the color, Legacy Dark Caramel, my opinion, will work great in this truck. We picked it up from Moore & Giles in Lynchburg, Virginia, because they source quality hides from the best tanneries in the world and supply all applications, whether it be aviation, furniture, or even automotive.
One thing about these European hides is typically they don't use barbed wire fences over there, so you typically run across very few flaws on these.
It's pretty interesting.
Next, Austin at the wheel.
With our design sketched out for Low and Slow's bench seat,
Inserts have to be. Square that off.
we first laid out our marks on the cushion to get a visual reference, then carefully cut out the sections that will serve as the inserts. Just a blade along a straight edge.
Pretty much, yeah. As I was thinking about this truck and, you know, especially keeping the original patina to the vehicle, I thought going with a retro style seat cover would be the best thing for it. Kind of the simpler the better. When this truck came out, it came out basically with a vinyl, plain vinyl seat cover. It had heat embossed imprints in it. And so it's kind of simple. We wanted to kind of keep the same cues to fit the vehicle.
With our 4 insert panels marked,
Bring our foam over.
we'll cut some foam with a 1/2 inch overlap before Mac begins the sewing process.
There's one.
In the 60s, Chevy offered deep cushion upholstery with vertical pleats, and there was a cloth vinyl upgrade for added comfort. We're going the opposite direction, and so is Mac.
Doing 5 lines to make 6 pleats.
He hasn't sewn on a regular basis in 10 years.
You know, it's a little different actually doing the work again. You know, you get a little rusty.
Yeah, could have fooled me. Mac went through those pleats on 3 panels in about 10 minutes, and then he passed on the throne to me. Oh, I can't let Mac have all the fun now, can I? Try my luck at this.
He was doing some pleats without a lot of guidance. He watched me do it. He didn't really have the lecture that goes along with it before I have students actually sew.
I gotta say, I was doing very well, and I was shooting a straight line with that stitch until the very end. We went a little wonky, a little sideways, but hey, we learn from our mistakes and start fresh.
Keep your hands in front.
To keep pulling
Yeah,
it.
so you're behind, and what happens when your hands are behind the machine is the machine pulls it. Mm-hmm. So by keeping your hands in front of the
Yep.
needle, it keeps them from sucking it in.
I guess we just gotta keep going, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Made a mistake. That's what happens. Sometimes we learn from our mistakes, and a lot of times I'll allow a student to make certain mistakes so that they can learn from it. They seem to learn faster that way. You want to try that one again?
Good. I have had prior experience sewing, but it was maybe 15, 20 years ago, back in junior high school days, sewing, you know, the pillowcases and pajamas at home ec class. And after he corrected me and taught me the right, proper techniques, and starting fresh, clean with the right instruction made all the difference in the world. Ready to
Right
know?
on. Okay, you did well. Now we got to border stitch it.
Once we got our base panel sewn up, this whole process is just consistency, repetition, and having patience. If you trace out your lines and measure correctly the first time, you can repeat that pattern over and get real consistent results in the end. If not, if you rush something or skip a step or try to cheat a little bit, it'll probably show in the end result.
Okay, we're gonna go 17 1/4.
A lot of guys will try to learn out of a book or maybe a video. Take a class. Take a class. I mean, most of our students bring a project in, they bring their own vehicle in, and they roll out with a fresh interior. Not only did they get a fair deal on their interior, but now they have a calling card, and they can show customers, hey, I can do this.
This whole time we're building two completely different sections of the seat back and the bottom cushion. Measuring, using those techniques, and I gotta say, it was flawless. All right, I'll crawl on through, Mac. Take it easy and try not to bang it up, huh? I can already tell you that this was a good color choice.
Look okay right there, huh?
After sitting in those old seats, I gotta say this is a world of a difference.
Well, you know, nothing like sitting on some nice leather, huh?
Came together nice, and I can't thank you enough. It was great having you here, spending time with you, and just absorbing all that knowledge.
Well, I appreciate coming out here and got a teaching moment in as well, so it's all good.
Win-win.
That's it.
Can't wait till next time.
All right.
You know, 50% of any truck build is the bed. And when it comes to that classic, it's a huge focal point.
We got our 65 C10 in the shop today. We're gonna be making a few changes on it. And one of those, like Austin says, is the bed. Now our original wood, it's not like it's rotten, it's just in really poor shape, and it just is boring to look at.
Time to spice it up a bit. Still weathered, still warm, but nice and fresh and clean.
I really dig the look, but I have one question for you. What are we gonna do with all this wood? I feel like you'd be the type
Toothpicks.
to put on an apron, get your woodworking chisels out, maybe make like a jewelry box, I don't know.
You're crazy, fool.
It is a beautiful day outside. The sun is shining. We're in a great looking truck. Temperature is perfect, and it's a brand new season. It does not get any better than this.
I'm so glad we're out of the shop, not working, just cruising around in this rig. It's an awesome ride, and it will be a great season to come. I can't wait.
Now, you guys might notice that this truck does look just a little bit different from the last time you saw it. Now, that's just because we didn't show you every last step of the build.
But not to worry, if you're just starting to watch, let's get you caught up. Found what we were looking for in the 65 C10 fleet side. And it didn't take long tearing this truck apart to figure out that somebody patched it together for a quick sale.
Mechanically, the truck was iffy at best. The engine was a later model 305, which was low on compression and smoked a bit, and just about every single bushing and joint in the suspension was shot. But that really wasn't a huge deal, since all we were really after was some good solid sheet metal.
We got right to work on the rebuild by getting the chassis powder coated. And we threw on a QA1 suspension kit, which will lower the ride height and improve handling. Then I painted the roof pearl white for a pop of color, while LT fabbed up the turbo kit for our 292 straight six.
With the cab undercoated, we threw it back on the frame. And Austin and Mac from Wyotech got busy creating a custom leather bench seat and some door panels. Well, I've got to say, the interior on this truck, it turned out, I mean, just perfect, honestly. Like, I know I had my reservations at first when he said you wanted to paint it white and have brown leather. But honestly, though, it actually looks great.
This a compliment coming from you?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I don't give all the compliments in the world, but yes, this, I'll hand it to you here.
It's an extremely weird feeling being the recipient of a compliment. I don't know what to do.
I guess I gotta reevaluate my life decisions, huh?
You're doing great.
But no, I mean, the truck, it is riding great. You know, the suspension, those coilovers, nice and tight, nice and low.
Dude, the steering is tight. Hopefully the brakes work really well, because we're tailgating someone at the moment. Couldn't ask for more, honestly.
I mean, don't get too ahead of yourself, though, because right now, there's no gauges in it. It would be nice to know how fast we're going.
Let's not get carried away. We gotta still have stuff to do in the future. I did forget to put the gauges in, but they are at the shop. It'd be nice if we even finish up the wiring, and by finish, I mean start the wiring.
Well, you know, it'd be nice to have things like taillights and headlights, I guess. Engine-wise, the turbo, man, that thing is all buttoned up, all the fab work is done, but engine-wise, Pat and Mike, they're still doing the machine work, so we probably need to throw that in.
Be cool if, yeah, we drop it in and a bed. Well, it's not a truck if you don't put a bed on it.
Right, so what do you say we quit screwing around and maybe head back to the shop and actually get to work?
Hate to say you're right, but I guess we got to, huh? Could have a little more power in reverse, but it does the job, I guess.
This is really good for the calves, I think. Why do I always get suckered into pushing?
You got longer legs, it's more efficient.
I don't think that has anything to do with it.
Think about it.
Every now and then you get a project that just kind of surprises you with how well it turns out. And this 65 C10 is a case of the sum of the parts being totally greater than them individually, or however that saying is supposed to go.
For sure, unlike most of the projects we do that are thought out, renderings, concepts, this one was kind of a little off the cuff. I mean, we knew we wanted a Patina truck and add a little flair to it, but it's all the little things that come together that actually made this pretty cool.
I mean, you kind of make it sound like an accident. I mean, I want to take a little bit of credit for what we built here, but no, honestly, there's just all the little things, like you said, they just add up to make this incredible package. Everything from the paint on the roof, the interior, the power plant. I mean, that's kind of my favorite just because of how cool and custom it is. But so where are we at and what do we got to finish up?
Well, if we put a bed on the back, it would actually make it a truck. I think it's time we maybe take care of it.
Yeah, let's take a look at what we're working with, because if I remember right, this was not in great shape.
Ooh, this is as low as she's gonna get, huh?
You know, those ballet classes are really starting to pay off.
Yeah, almost fell through too.
I believe that. This floor is pretty rough. You know, it just kind of goes to show what condition this truck is or was in when we picked it up. Somebody really just pulled this out of a field and they slapped it together. These planks, they're actually pretty new. It's just something that they must have had kicking around. They milled it up and they stuck it in. But just, it doesn't match and it's just kind of plain.
Yeah, not to mention the rails have seen better days. They're about rusted out, and the few new ones they did put in there, well, they fake patinaed them, which actually blends them in quite well.
Yeah, you know, we also could take the opportunity to put in a little bit wider wheel tub to fit maybe just a little bit more rubber in this thing for some traction when we launch it. Really, this is more what we have in mind for the look on the floor of the bed. It still looks rustic, maybe kind of that old barnwood, but just something with a little bit more difference in the color. So let me show you guys what we picked up to make this happen.
It ain't wood and it won't rust. Find out next.
So about a year and a half ago, I was at the C10 Nationals down in Texas. It was a great show and I had a lot of time to walk through the manufacturers midway and see some of the new products that people had come out with for these trucks. And there was a bedwood floor kit that caught my eye, and that's because there was a big giant graphic completely applied to the floor of the bed. Now that caught my attention because I first of all wondered how the heck do they get that in the bed? Because wood is a tough material to work with. So I stopped and I realized it actually wasn't wood, it was an extruded aluminum bed floor kit from Smoky Road Rod Shop. And that's what we've ordered up here. Now first of all, it has that nice barnwood texture that we're going for, but there's a couple advantages to using aluminum. Number one, it's lightweight. This stuff is extruded and it weighs almost nothing. Most traditional bedwood floor kits, well, they're made from hardwood and that's very heavy. So if you want a fast truck, lightweight is your friend. And the other advantage to this system is how clean it's going to look when it's installed. There are no exposed fasteners on these rails at all. There's a small groove on the back of the extrusion that the hardware is going to go into that holds everything nice and tight and has a nice clean look. And on top of that, we had our logo put in the bed, Project Low and Slow, so this thing is going to look great. All right, Romeo, let's get this thing lifted up.
You think you can handle it?
I hope so. Oh, man, there we go. Yeah, don't let it go the other way. A couple of straps and some wrenches, I guess.
Yeah, keep it square.
So as soon as we take the bed floor out of this thing, there's really going to be nothing that holds it in place. Basically, it could just flop over and all our bed sides will be sitting on the ground. So you take two straps and you run them at a diagonal and they're going to keep this thing nice and square so nothing falls apart. All right, let's get this thing unbolted.
Zipper it off.
Let's get some boards falling. make some really nice old decorative furniture.
Demolition always goes so much quicker, huh?
Isn't this just fun? It's relaxing.
There we go. That's all I wanted to do.
This is a very fragile piece of construction we have here.
Almost hit you, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Now, originally this truck had the fuel tank behind the seat, actually inside the cab. Not very safe. So we have already gone and mounted the fuel tank back here on the frame rails, but we're actually going to be running a fuel-injected engine, which means we need a little bit more pressure than the old-school mechanical pumps that are bolted to the side of the block can provide. So we went to Summit Racing and we picked up this in-tank electric fuel pump kit. Now basically, you drill a hole in the top of the tank, this guy mounts down here, you trim it to the right length, and this has an internal regulator and it'll supply 60 psi of fuel all the way up to the engine. Everything's great. The only thing we need to figure out is where exactly we're going to put the hole in the top of the tank. And there's a few things that we have to kind of work around. Number one, the rear bed brace is going right across there, so we don't want to put it kind of in this area. And number two, there are two baffles that are inside the tank. They kind of keep the fuel from sloshing around. They sit right here and here. So our pump is going to go right there. Now, one mistake I see a lot of people make when they're using a hole saw is just rushing things and twisting your wrist. It's like my old man used to tell me. He said, you get paid by the hour, so don't rush it. Let the teeth from the saw do the work. Don't use too much pressure and run the drill at a low speed. That way you don't burn up the teeth on the bit. With a little patience, you'll be done in no time. Included in the kit, you get this yellow guy right here. Now, it looks like a sponge for washing your car, but it's not. It actually goes down inside the tank, and it has to do with the pickup of fuel. Now, normally the pump sits maybe 1/4 to 1/2 inch above the bottom of the tank. But remember, fuel is a liquid, and it's constantly sloshing around as you're driving around corners, accelerating and decelerating. And if this isn't constantly submerged, you'd be running low on fuel pressure, and your engine would probably die out. So this guy is actually a fuel baffle of sorts. It's made from a fuel-resistant foam, and it has this plastic bucket that kind of sits down on the bottom. So no matter how low the tank is, there'll always be a small reservoir of fuel that the pump is submerged in, so you'll never run out of fuel pressure unless you run entirely out of fuel.
Next, Austin gets in the zone.
Austin, you gotta check this bed floor out. It's looking great.
I like it. I like it. Well, dude, I just got finished prepping these, scuffed them up with the DA, but honestly, I still don't know which route I'm taking as far as finish.
Well, I mean, I guess you got a couple different options, right? Number one, you could do the whole fake patina thing. You know, we've done that before. Basically, you spray a little bit of red oxide primer on there. You put some color on top, and you sand through it in a couple different areas. But the thing is, it wouldn't match. It would almost stick out worse than it would blend in.
For sure, and it's not the style of the truck, right? We have the real patina and then some newly fresh painted stuff. We know black doesn't look right because they were e-coated in black and it was just a little off. If it was a rat rod, I would just say, hey, let's call it a day and bolt them up like it is.
Well, we just got to pick a color then to paint both the tubs and the strips and blend it all in.
Yeah, I've been thinking, and I honestly think it would look good if we carry that white over on the back because it's a new part. So
still have the same pearl and the clear coat for a nice glossy look?
Nice and shiny. Do the same on the strips because they're bare aluminum.
Hey, I was cleaning out my toolbox and I found one of those nice fine texture paint rollers. I can get busy if you want.
No, absolutely not. I'm gonna spray this.
I offer my help, he won't accept it. It's like, I don't know. I'll help carry parts. All right, I got all the hard work done. They're sorted in alphabetical order.
You even know how to say the alphabet?
Yeah, you start with Z, right? Or Z. All right, my work's done.
Get out of here.
If you spend any time around painters or a body shop, you'll quickly realize that there are a lot of chemicals required to execute a flawless paint job. And the first, what Austin is doing now, is a primer. That's the base material that you lay down that'll bond to the bare metal and provides a nice even layer for the subsequent coats. Then, depending on what type of finish you're looking to achieve, you may have some sort of a sealer that goes down that just provides a nice, even layer. And then on top of that, you'll have a base coat.
What are you talking about?
I'm just trying to make it look good, man. I'm explaining all the steps to a basic paint job.
Hey, Case, go ahead. Need all the help I can get.
Now, clearly, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to pull off a great paint job. But on top of the sealer, you have a base coat. That's where your color is. And finally, you have the clear. That's what provides the UV protection and the gloss. Modern-day pickup truck beds are made from large pieces of sheet metal that have been stamped together and spot welded as one major assembly. These older trucks, they're made from several small pieces that bolt together. Now, our original cross sills have been thoroughly rusted out. They're over 50 years old. So we went to Summit Racing and we picked up a bunch of replacements. Now, the only modification that we had to do is because this is a hidden fastener bed system, well, I had to spot weld a couple of half-inch bolts to the middle 3 cross sills. That way we can tighten it up without having to fish a little wrench in between this small area and the bed. I guess all the paint's done, right?
Got it sorted.
So that means it's time to start bolting this bed together.
Yeah, I don't know why you got the rusty rails still there.
Oh, we're just playing show and tell. Really, I guess the main objective here is just to get everything kind of located.
Slide these dudes in temporary.
Yep. Which side you going on this?
All right, I guess like this.
All right. So the coolest thing about this bed system is the fact that it uses a hidden fastener. On the back side of these rails is a very small channel and it holds a 1/4-inch bolt. Nothing on the top, looks nice and smooth. But it also doubles as a fun little game. You ready? Race to the bottom?
Feel like I was loading a BB gun.
Hold on, you got a head start. 3, 2, 1, go.
All by gravity.
You have all 5 to the bottom though.
Oh, winner.
Oh man, I got a dud.
You owe me lunch.
All right, let's put this in. The best part about this aluminum bed floor from Smoky Road Rod Shop is how easily it installs. You don't need any woodworking tools or even a paintbrush. It all just bolts right into place.
Next, we'll get an update on our engine.
Where are you going? The truck's this
I
way.
know you got a little high for me, don't you think? Just don't bang up my paint back
Oh
there.
no, you're good. We're like still 8 inches away. Yeah, you gotta push frontwards majorly. There you go.
Don't scratch the paint.
Yeah, I know a guy who can fix it.
Get this dangerous thing out of here. It's just paint.
Yeah.
Okie doke, let's see what we actually working with here.
Honestly, I'm digging it. I mean, the white just kind of flows from the roof to the strips to the tubs and works with the wood grain. It just works.
Dude, I am too. When this was 12 foot over that way, it was a bit much and it looked weird. But now that it's on the truck, it flows. I like it.
I know what you mean. Just having it on the truck makes a huge difference. But I guess all we got to do is put a hole in the floor for the filler next and we're done.
For sure, that'll wrap up the rear. And what do you say we go see where they at with the motor?
I'm excited. I want to see that 292 done.
Get that wrapped up. Fresh parts on the table. Looks like we're getting close.
What's up, gentlemen? Looks like progress to me.
Man, I just got done painting some of your parts and that timing cover. Can't find them.
Yeah, all those
Nobody
old
offers
tans
one.
hard to source, man.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically why we had to buy that backup motor, just because you can't find any of that stuff.
That was a great idea.
Turbo-wise, we kind of got everything finished up fab work. You know, we've got the crossover, feeds into the S366 turbo. Got you a 4-inch downpipe there, plenty of flow. It's probably, honestly, a bit overkill, but it fits the chassis, the split manifolds. Got the wastegate dump. That'll kind of sound nice when it's under boost.
It's gonna look cool.
It looks really
Definitely.
cool. All that just fabricated stainless piping. When you pop the hood on that truck, you just don't expect it. But that's the outside taken care of. But what do we have to do on the inside of an engine to make it withstand, you know, this much boost pressure that we're going to plan on feeding into it?
Well, you have to remember this engine's not designed for a lot of boost, right? Or this type of power, but there are some things that we can do. This has main studs in it now. We've, if you're gonna align hone it anyway, why not put studs in it? Is it necessary for this power level? No, but why not do it while we can? Also, this block has been set up for head studs. And for boost pressure, I think that actually will help a little bit keeping the thing sealed up.
And even though we're not running crazy boosts, head studs will always help, right?
Absolutely.
So it sounds like basically we're starting with a stock block, but you're just making sure everything is exactly the size and dimension that you want it. You know, strengthen it where applicable. Mike, what's up with the connecting rods? What'd you guys do there?
Connecting rods, just for a little extra strength in that down low, we decided to throw some ARP rod bolts in it. And we got something going on with the pistons, so go ahead and
yeah, we're changing it to a hyper-eutectic piston from just a cast piston. Has an increased amount of silicon content because we're generating extra heat that will keep the skirts away from scuffing a little bit. We also, when we honed it on our SV15. We increased the bore clearance and we increased the ring gaps for boosted applications.
But even though we're not doing anything crazy at the bottom end, this thing will handle north of 400, no problem, huh?
Absolutely, and for the power level that you're looking for, I think we're right in the ballpark for what we need to do for the engine's specifications.
It's gonna be fun, baby.
So that's the short block handles. What are we putting on top of this?
Well, that's where we received a lot more attention. The cylinder head has been extensively modified as far as cylinder heads go.
Now, Pat, in a situation like this, a lot of guys would say, well, just throw a couple more pounds of boost to it. What did we really do by opening it up?
Well, we increased the airflow capacity aside from boost. We basically treated this like a naturally aspirated engine about how it's getting air in. Boost is just going to augment that. It's going to require less boost to make more power. So
all in all, it'll increase the flow and help direct the air, right?
Right, less turbulence, more flow.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I can't wait to hear this thing run, guys. Honestly, I'm really excited. It looks like we're making great progress.
Have you ever heard a performance six-banger run? I'm not talking all that, what you're thinking, all that.
No,
that,
not a Cummins.
That kerosene
Hey,
burner.
I'm excited. We get to hear both ways, NA and turbo,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
So that'll be a cool comparison and just hear the sound difference.
You guys will be pulling the levers on the dyno and everything, so
Yeah.
we'll have some fun with it.
You're going to have some fun.
And LT, I gotta say this, man. This engine doesn't take the yellow can, it takes the red can.
Time out, Mike. Everybody knows if you add about 10% diesel into any engine, your torque number just goes way, way up.
All right, that's keyboard jockeys.
Gotta love
Well, Pat's mad because we're giving away all the racer secrets.
Oh, my God, yes.
Oh, man. Well, another thing, added a little strength to the block with some paint.
Yeah, I was going to say silver. That's a bold choice, but I think I like
it's
it.
aluminum.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I think with what you're doing on the truck, it kind of fits the color scheme. So.
For sure. Once we got the black tins on there, and we still probably got to pick a coating for the turbo and manifold, but do something with that. I think it'd be cool.
I think it's going to look great. Not only is it going to look great, it's going to run great. So
We're excited to do it. It's a fun one. Now, here in the next month or so, we're going to be coming to you for some help on a project.
Would y'all start building trucks now or something?
No, it has nothing to do with truck. Nothing to do with truck. But you know how it goes. One hand washes the other.
You need somebody to do some welding for you. I'm your guy.
Oh my God, that was awkward.
Oh my God, that was awkward. I gotta say, it's been a long time coming on this 65 C10, but with me and Yahoo here, these things take time. The interior came out great. Basically, we'll throw some gauges in it, be driving it by this afternoon.
So that's where you get your information on how to build trucks? The Yahoo?
The internet.
Now, before we go anywhere, obviously, we've got to put an engine underneath the hood of our C10. And this is probably a power plant that's just a little more unique than what you guys are used to seeing.
Yeah, but after today, you won't be able to say that no more.
When it came time to selecting the power plant that's going to go under the hood of our C10, we had one requirement. It had to be different and unique.
That means no LS and no small block Chevy.
Now, as much as those motors are great and can make power, this is so much cooler. It's a turbocharged Chevy 292 straight six. It is actually a collaboration between us and the guys next door at Engine Power. We handled all the fab work, and they handled the machine work.
Now, before we get carried away and drop this thing in, there's a few little things we'll take care of, and one of those will be brake lines, just be a lot easier to get to. And we'll also give you a quick rundown of how this thing was properly put together.
At PowerNation, we're lucky to work with some first-class builders. And when it came to our 292's final assembly, we enlisted the services of Pat and Mike from Engine Power. The first step was for them to finalize the bore geometry on the cylinder hone. They first roughed it in with a 220 grit stone and finished things off with a 600. With all the machining processes complete and the block thoroughly cleaned, the main bearings and caps were installed and torqued down. and the oil clearance was verified. Once they knew everything was within spec, the bearings get a coat of assembly lube for protection on initial startup, and the crankshaft is carefully lowered into place. The main caps are installed and torqued to spec one final time. Next, it was time for a custom comp cam which had been designed to run well in boosted applications. To complete the rotating assembly, a trip to the machine shop was necessary to resize the connecting rods. Pat is an old pro, and in no time he had the stock rods ready to go. While they were there, the cylinder head got the valve guides finalized, and the valve seats were cut for oversized valves. Back at the shop, Pat got busy on the milling machine to modify the heads to drastically improve horsepower and airflow. To finish things up, the ports were massaged by hand, and the head was assembled with new valves, springs, and retainers. With all 6 hyper-eutectic pistons installed, the timing cover, balancer, and oil pump and oil pan go on, finishing up a custom spec'd 292 short block. The head was torqued into place, and the valve train was installed. Over on the engine dyno, things were finished up with an intake and exhaust manifold, along with a dyno-specific carburetor. And we just had to stop by to see how much power our baby would lay down.
Yeah, that's where it starts to sound good.
It sounds like an airplane.
Awesome oil pressure, everything. Let's see what we got.
Wow, 220 horsepower.
Finally, we installed the turbocharger and intercooler and made a few more hits on the dyno where it laid down an impressive 376 horsepower and 510 pounds of torque at only 10.5 pounds of boost.
Well, I have got to say, that engine sounded pretty awesome on the dyno. And the thing that impressed me the most was how quickly a 292 cubic inch engine spooled up that S366. Massive amounts of torque, and that means this little manual transmission truck is going to be a blast to drive.
For sure. It's built solid, we got good horsepower. That means awesome burnouts to come. Now, so we don't kill our brakes too quick, we got a little something planned for that. And then while you tackling that, because you are, I don't know if you knew that, I'm going to handle the rear. We'll use that factory bumper, but I got something in mind that just might clean it up a bit.
Divide and conquer. Well, I guess Austin wanted to make sure I handled the brakes just so we don't have any accidents later on. Every braking system starts up here on the firewall. This is a master cylinder that we picked up from Summit Racing, and this one is special because it has an adjustable proportioning valve bolted onto the side. Now, this is important for us because we converted to a 4-wheel disc brake setup. And this way we can adjust the bias between the front and the rear brake, so if we're ever in a panic stop situation, all 4 wheels lock up at the same time. Now, that little special something Austin was talking about is this guy right here. This is called a line lock, or it's also known as a roll control. And basically what it allows us to do is lock up the front brakes and have no braking pressure on the rear. And this is helpful for, I don't know, whenever you want to spin the tires or whenever you're staging at the drag strip. Now, this is pretty simple to install, and it goes in the front brake system. So the only thing I have to do is find a place to mount it. And I'm thinking somewhere right on here in the frame rail. So the first step is to build a bracket. When it comes to building custom trucks, there are a lot of times you're going to have to mock up a bracket because there are so many different aftermarket parts that you're going to install. And as always, there's a couple of different ways you could mock things up. Number one, you could go super high tech and use a 3D scanner and some rapid prototyping materials. But that's just not practical for most everybody. So you could also go completely Stone Age and use some corrugated cardboard. Now, this is what everyday materials ship in through the mail, but the problem is it really only folds in one direction and not very precisely at that. So I don't recommend cardboard. Instead, I recommend you go to a craft supply store and pick up some of this fiber or chipboard. It's fairly thin and you can easily cut it with a standard pair of scissors. And the best part is you can fold it easily in any direction in a very precise manner. So I went ahead and I mocked up the bracket that we're going to use to mount the roll control to an existing hole in the frame of our C10. It's going to have 3 holes in the front for the roll control, 1 hole on top for it to mount to an existing hole in the frame, and then all it has is a simple 90-degree bend. So now the only thing I have to do is turn this into metal.
into low and slow for good. That's next. Okay, that works.
With the roll control securely mounted, all of the major components of the braking system are in place. So now it's just a matter of connecting the dots with some brake line. Now, I did go to Summit Racing and pick up a pre-bent stainless steel brake line kit that's designed for an early 60s Chevy C10. The problem is, though, we've got a lot of different components and the kit was not designed to work with a roll control. So I'll just use these pieces as a starting point and connect the proportioning valve to the inlet of the roll control. Now, I do need to trim it and reflare it a little bit, but from there are two outlets. One goes to the left front and one goes to the right front. The very last thing I got to do is go from the rear of the proportioning valve all the way to the rear of the truck, and this brake system is done. Cut it right about there. Well, I've got to say, probably without exception, this is the best sounding engine that we've built on this show, like ever.
And that's just on the dyno. Wait till we have it in the truck with a proper exhaust built ran to the back. Dude, it'll be a one of a kind for sure.
I know, I can't wait. But the only problem with the dyno is you can't do burnouts on it. So this engine has got to go back in that truck. Now, we do have to remove a lot of this turbo componentry because, well, you can't lower the engine down into the truck. The heater box kind of sits right here on top of the hot side of the turbo, and the hot side of the exhaust is very close to the cross member. So we'll just take it all off for like the 50th time and get it back in there.
Between the mock-up motor and this one, putting them together, taking them apart. At least we know, though, it ran on the dyno. We have no leaks. We're not going to have any problems. Last time we put it in here should actually be the last time.
Well, that's building trucks for you, and I've really only got 2 clamps on this side, so I guess the rest is up to you.
Yeah, I'll see you in like an hour when I'm done. Hey, give me that screwdriver. Got it, baby.
You imagine having to do this like a normal person with a cherry picker?
I mean, we are doing it by hand. I don't know if that counts.
Somewhere in there. We're going to be running a Tremec 5-speed manual transmission behind our Turbo 292, and this C10 is going to be a blast to drive. But first we need to install the clutch assembly, and the first part is a flywheel. Now, this is a steel disc that gets bolted directly to the back of the crankshaft, and as the engine spins, it actually helps conserve energy. So that way, when you let the clutch out, the inertia that's stored in the flywheel will prevent the engine RPM from dropping too low. Now, on top of that, there's a nice smooth machined surface on the face of the flywheel, and that is what the friction disc of the clutch is going to grab against. So all we got to do is get this bolted up to the back of the engine.
Well, I sure am glad we got to endure that physics lesson. Super exciting stuff. It's now time to figure out which clutch disc we're actually going to use for this truck. When it comes to it, it's just like selecting brake pads for a rotor. You could start out with your basic organic compound, and that's good for about 475 foot-pounds. Low high performance application, you got your hybrid. This will be good for about 580 foot-pounds. And then for your high performance applications and your big foot-pound of torque, all the way up to about 775, you got your ceramic. Now, you may think bigger is better and just go with the big old ceramic dude, but let me tell you, drivability will not be pleasant. It's going to engage pretty hard, it's probably going to chatter, and you probably won't even be able to leave the driveway. So for this dude, we're going with the hybrid. Middle of the road, it'll still be drivable.
You know, maybe if you didn't spend so much time in home ec class learning how to tie quilts, you could be up here giving physics lessons with me.
There's a lot of
But
kids
instead,
in home ec class.
you could hold that.
Now, it's pretty simple to slap this old clutch disc in there. They usually come with a little dowel installation tool that's splined just right. Help everything line up. That way when you put that transmission in, it slides right on.
And the very last piece of the puzzle is this guy right here, a pressure plate. You can almost think of this as like a brake caliper. It's what engages and disengages against the friction disc. All right, hold right there.
Next, we're talking trans.
All right, so we got the Tremec TKO 5-speed sitting on the table that American Powertrain sent us. And that means it's time to set up a clutch. Now we're using a hydraulic system. So this slave cylinder throwout bearing assembly is going to take the place of that old mechanical fork style that presses against those fingers, which pushes in your clutch disc and applies friction to the flywheel. Now, to set this up, this really just slides on the input shaft and is guided by this dowel pin. The idea here is you want to have about 150 thousandths of clearance between the surface of this bearing and your clutch fingers in the pressure plate. And that'll allow enough room after it breaks in for those fingers to relax and still have room to wiggle. After all, you don't want this pushed in too far, applying too much force on that clutch disc. You'll just heat it up and it'll wear out pretty quick. Kind of like a brake pad and rotor system. You want some free play, but not too much before it engages, so it works properly. Now, the way I'll take this measurement is we're basically going to take a measurement from the surface of the bearing to where the bell housing sits on the transmission. In order to do that, you find yourself a good little straight edge, flat surface where the bell housing mounts up, and some dowel calipers, and dial it in right by eye. Now, basically repeat the process on the bell housing side. You put your straight edge against the flat surface of the bell housing, push the dowel calipers all the way into those fingers on the pressure plate, pull a measurement. Subtract the two, and that gives you your distance. Now, we already measured this one out, and it comes in at 164 thousandths, which is right in the acceptable range, give or take. So that means time to get this dude under the truck. And I'd ask LT for help, but he'd honestly be none at all. Gotta do it myself.
All I know is if you stay in school, you can get paid to sit around and watch other people do the hard work. That's all I'm saying.
Where you at there, Cretus?
Who?
Just grab it. What's the stay in school thing, man? I just finished school.
No, I mean, the thing is, you're a great example to all those kids. You really are.
What school did you go
Show how
to?
you can adapt and overcome.
I hope the splines line up.
Yeah.
Up, we gotta go up. Yeah, right there. What happened? That input shaft bottoming out? You know we have a trans jack, right?
Yeah, but it's like a weird, awkward shape. All right, I'm trying to do this without actually damaging the seal. But basically what I'm doing is I'm just gonna put these vice grips on here gently. Now the transmission's in gear. That way we can turn the output shaft, which turns the input shaft, to hopefully line it up into the clutch disc, because I think that's the problem we're having. It's just not lining up. So let's get another shot. All right, be sure to put your fingers in the small gap, right?
Okay, start high.
Okay, it's gonna come down so it'll actually go in. There we go.
Right there.
There we go. Yep.
There we go. All right, we got her.
Looks like it's in. What is it, time for cross member? Well, there you have it. The Tremec TKO 5-speed successfully installed by two slightly amateur mechanics. With the drivetrain in its final resting place, we can move on to installing the components of the turbo system. And we know everything's going to fit perfectly because we've fabricated it with the engine mocked up in the chassis. Now, the one thing we do have to consider this time is heat management, because this crossover pipe, well, even though it does give really great ground clearance, it is actually pretty close to the oil pan, and I don't want any extra heat to radiate from the exhaust into the oil. So I wrapped it up with some of this titanium heat wrap. It's basically just a small cloth that you wrap around the exhaust pipe. And I'm gonna have to do the same thing to the downpipe because it does come kind of close to the starter. But we are one step closer to driving this 292. Next, some finishing touches. So we're now at the point of a build where everything basically gets easier, and that's because all the hard work is done. The fab work for the turbo setup is complete. The engine, We know it runs, and we know it doesn't leak, and we know exactly how much horsepower it's gonna make. So the only thing we have to do is bolt all the parts back in place, and we're headed down the road.
And that's the best thing about these old trucks. You have all the room in the world in this engine bay to work. You can route your plumbing, run your wires, put my big old hands in there without busting knuckles, and obviously this straight six help matters too, you know?
And speaking of the straight six, a lot of people are gonna look at this and say, why did you go with a throwaway engine? For many, many years, if you bought a truck that had a straight six underneath the hood, the first thing you're gonna do is take that thing out and throw in a big block, a small block, or nowadays probably an LS. But a small displacement engine with forced induction is actually coming around again, and a lot of the manufacturers are using engines just like this today.
Yeah, it's kind of like that old pair of corduroy pants you got hiding in the closet. Trendy. And the six-cylinder is no different. It's more popular now than ever. And that's for fuel efficiency. You add turbos, you put power adders, you still get those mid-level ranges of horsepower, and they're torquey, and that's the thing that makes them fun to drive.
And if you want just a little bit of extra torque, well, that's easy. All you gotta do is mess with a wastegate and put a little more spring pressure on top of this thing. Your boost level goes up, and so does your horsepower and torque. Now, for our particular engine, we are kind of near the limit because we have stock connecting rods and a stock crankshaft. But just in general terms, that's one reason why turbocharging is so popular.
And speaking of boost, time to cool it down and slap that intercooler up front.
In order to eliminate any possibility of leaking silicone couplers, we went ahead and we welded the end charge pipes onto the tank. That ensures a nice leak-free connection and just kind of looks cool as well. Now, we did mount the intercooler up front because there is no space behind the grille. And when we first put this in, we thought, you know what? We could almost run this as the grille of the truck. But the problem was the headlights. We didn't really have a nice, clean way to mount the buckets and have it look right. So you might ask yourself, why is an intercooler important? Well, it's simple. It's physics. That turbo up there, as nice as it looks, it's going to make the intake air charge nice and hot. So just about every vehicle on the road with a turbocharger uses an intercooler to bring down the temperature of the air. Increases the density, increases the oxygen content, and increases the capacity for horsepower.
Now we decided to close up the front of this old girl with an original look, and to do that we're using this reproduction grille. Now this chrome work is going to match the front bumper, some of the chrome trim on the wheels, and some of the other accents we got on the truck. And best of all, in my opinion, it'll cover up that intercooler, which will make it not look so aftermarket. It'll still have that classic truck vibe, but sporting a turbo. Now, I was able to reuse the original headlight buckets. They're in good shape, just had to tweak them a little to get them to work. But the original headlight retainer rings, well, these things have seen better days, so we got to order some new ones. And that is going to be to mount these new projector LED headlights. Once they're in, they're going to look pretty cool, and we'll definitely be able to see cruising at night. So let's just wrap up this grill and call her a day. Good on that side?
Looking good, buddy.
All right, two more. And they line up.
Now, as far as you guys at home are concerned, this is the last time you're going to see Project Low and Slow for a little while. It's not 100% done yet. There's just a few small details that we need to finish up, but it's mostly just boring stuff that you're probably not going to want to watch anyway.
And we're about 99% of the way there. Well, honestly, maybe 95, 96, but the point is we're almost there. All we really have to do is drop a radiator in, run some cooling, run some fuel lines, fab up some exhaust, call this thing done.
And we'll wrap up with a nut and bolt inspection of the entire truck. Because remember, this was a frame-off restoration. Everything came apart, so we need to double check to make sure we didn't forget to tighten anything back up.
Then, off to some burnouts, and I might have just the spot for that.
And if you guys have any questions about any of the parts that we used on this truck, check out our build list at PowerNationTV.com. So, you want me to handle the exhaust? What are you going to handle?
I'm going to get us some more power.
We do need a lot of those because I've seen the way you drive and you're probably going to run these wheels or something.
Drive?
Yeah.
Wait, you drive?
Well, there it is. Project Low and Slow is finally outside the shop because it's done. And today we finally get to feel how that Turbo 292 drives under full boost.
Finito. Finally at the end, the build is complete, so get excited. Well, buddy, we finally made it. It's been a long time since we first took the cab off this rusty old frame and sent it off to powder coat.
You know, my favorite part about low and slow is you probably can't tell that the cab has ever even been off of the frame because it has such a nice patina finish on the outside. It looks like we just pulled it out of a field. But as they say, there's more than meets the eye.
And that is what custom truck building is all about, my friend. It's the subtle touches, such as the brand new paint on the roof, draping it down the back, an entire new bed floor, added some nice wide wheel tubs, then finished up the exterior with some new chrome trim and chrome bumpers.
And most of our effort was spent on the chassis. Now, even though this truck looks old and decrepit from the outside, we spent a whole lot of time on the chassis to make it run and drive like a brand new truck that's right off the showroom floor.
But if you take a seat on the inside, it will drop you right back into 1965. It still has that nostalgic original feel. It's just freshened up with new paint, custom seat upholstery, door panels, and some nice gauges and steering wheel.
And there's a whole lot of details that we're leaving out. So here's a quick look back at where we got started.
We bought this truck sight unseen and we're very pleased to find out how nice of a patina it had on its surface. It came to us from Marshall, Texas, where the sun is always shining. So the elements had plenty of time to work their magic on the paint without completely rotting away the metal.
And this truck would actually run and drive. And let me tell you, it was an experience. The manual shift on the column was a throwback for sure, which made this truck an absolute blast. Even though the suspension was completely shot, the engine had a slight miss, and the bench seat was like riding on a horse-drawn wagon.
Feel the bump. So we didn't waste any time on low and slow. We got right to work on tearing her down. We're not going to be touching much of anything on the exterior, but we did want to address the frame. So the first thing was to remove that bed and cab off the chassis. Once it was all stripped down, we sent it off to get a new coat of semi-gloss black powder coat, and then built out the frame with an all-new suspension, which will sit nice and low to the ground, and greatly improved the handling of this 55-year-old pickup.
Finally, we paired a GM 292 straight 6 with a Tremec 5-speed from American Powertrain, which will give this truck truly a unique driving experience. Having a 292 straight 6 by itself is pretty unique. However, we wanted to turn it up a notch even further than that. So on the passenger side, we fabricated a mount and installed an S366 turbo that's putting out 11 pounds of boost.
Now the awesome thing about that is stock, this engine would typically only put out about 165 horsepower. We more than doubled that and got it somewhere right at 500 pounds of torque. I'd say that's pretty awesome in itself.
Now those numbers are impressive, but for me the cool thing is the unique factor. Because if you go to a truck show and there's 100 C10s, you're mostly going to find small block Chevys and LSs and perhaps the occasional big block. But this one truly stands out from the crowd.
Well, fun to talk about, fun to look at, more fun to drive. So I say let's hit the road there.
All right, don't wreck it.
Yeah, no promises. There is nothing like the feeling you experience when you drive an old classic truck. And driving this 1965 C10 that me and old Lawrence built is no different. Just because it's a custom built truck doesn't mean it doesn't still have those same old classic and nostalgic styling cues.
I think my favorite part about this old truck is the sound of it because it's so deceiving or confusing for people. Because think about it, you see an old truck like this and you're gonna think, oh, it's gotta have a V8 under the hood. And then you hear that distinctive inline-six sound and that whistle of the turbo and the blow-off valve, and you're like, wait a second, I'm looking for a Supra or a Skyline or some sort of import car. But then it'll finally click and you realize, wait a second, that old C10 has got a turbocharged straight 6 under the hood, and that right there is what makes this truck so unique.
This is just a fun truck to drive, man. God, don't get better. Does not get better.
I love it. An old rusty truck that drives and handles just like a brand new sport car. Does not get any better than that.
Next, James Otto's love for the C10 is mutual.
It was my grandfather's truck. Spent its whole life on a farm up in North Dakota, and I wanted it to be pro touring truck, and that's the way we built it.
We're not the only ones cruising the back roads in a tricked out C10. We asked our buddy, country music artist James Otto to join us in his 66 resto mod featured at the SEMA show. We put our trucks side by side just to contrast how each were built, in completely different styles. Now, I don't think we could have found a cooler comparison between two trucks which started out life virtually identical, and they've wound up in two totally different places. So, James, tell us a little bit about your truck.
Well, you know, it's a 1966 C10. It was my grandfather's. Spent its whole life on a farm up in North Dakota, and I wanted it to be pro touring truck, and that's the way we built it. I love the old Patina look. It's a great look, but this thing needed to look high tech. It needed to look like 2020, and hopefully we accomplished that. It's got an LS under the hood, about 500 horse, 6-speed stick underneath it. It's got ride tech suspension and does everything I need it to do.
Tell me about the chassis. Did you start from scratch with a whole aftermarket unit, or did you build off of a stock frame?
You know, we found a stock short wheelbase chassis, and then did a frame stiffener in it, and then did the stage 3 ride tech setup underneath it. So it handles like it's on rails. It's been a blast to drive. I'm having fun with it.
Now, other than the patina finish, the other big difference between these two is what was stuck under the hood of this one. So tell us your thoughts on this C10.
I love that you kept it like that. I think that that's such a cool way to do it. LSs are, you know, they're belly button. Everybody's got one, you know what I mean? I love my LS, and it's perfect for autocrossing, and that's what I wanted to do. But with a patina truck and this vibe, hard to beat.
This is probably the coolest comparison that we could have done.
I think so too. The juxtaposition of same body style and ending up in a completely different spot, man, that's what hot rodding's all about.
Got that right. Well, it was great hanging out with James and his beautiful C10, and it's built in a totally different style from this truck here, but they're both perfect examples of classic American iron. Now, for our truck, it's time to put it to the test and see how fast it's going to go in a straight line.
Now, anytime we finish a build, you'll always see us driving them on the road, see how it feels and handles, but you'll definitely always see us at some sort of racetrack, and I don't even care what kind it is.
And the great thing about a drag strip, well, it's sort of a universal measuring stick, because I don't care where you live, there's bound to be some sort of a drag strip near your home. So it's a great way to compare your truck or car to any other vehicle out on the road.
I have no clue how quick this truck's gonna be, but we're gonna find out, and we're gonna have fun doing it.
All right, well, get to it. You're first.
Hopefully I don't break it. We're about to run a little C10 down the track and see how fast it goes. And I don't know how fast it's gonna go.
Hey, don't break it.
Hope I don't break it. Why you always worried about me breaking everything?
I know you too well.
Do you? May have broke it. Doesn't sound great. LT's gonna be mad at me. That's all right. We might have slightly broken. What's rattling?
So what happened? Was it shifting funny or what?
So when I went to put it in a gear, it didn't want to take it, so I just stopped.
All right,
Like
kill
I
it.
shifted in the second. When I went to put it into third, it didn't want to take it.
Turn that up.
But something is rattling.
That's why we trailer these things.
No, I went from third to second. No, not third. This dude's messing me up with numbers. You know I can't count past 5.
What?
So I went to second. When I went to third, it like didn't want it. So I just had to get out of it. LT's gonna be mad at me for a while. He'll get over it. And if he doesn't, doesn't matter. Well, You win some, you lose some.
And
For complications, don't really know what they are at the moment, but we're gonna take it back to the shop and we're gonna figure it out. That's all part of it. You build it, you break it, you bring it back, figure out what's wrong, and rebuild it.
some things are just better left unsaid, and I really don't have anything to add. So, yeah, in the trailer and back to the shop.
He's just upset because he didn't get the drive.
With our C10, I was worried that we had damaged the 292, but it turns out the flywheel bolts had backed out, so it was just rattling around. No big deal. Want to learn more about this build? Check it out at PowerNationTV.com.